My father forgot to hang up his phone. That one mistake cost him everything. I was sitting in my apartment, the same apartment I paid for while they lived rent-free in my $890,000 house, when I heard his voice crackle through the speaker. "She's nothing but a leech." My mother laughed. "Always so desperate for our attention." Then my brother. "She actually thinks buying us things makes her family." I should have hung up. I should have cried. Instead, I sat frozen as they casually discussed their next move, how to fake another emergency to drain more money from me. $20,000 for their European vacation wasn't enough. They wanted more. But it was my father's final words that changed everything. "If only she weren't mine to begin with." In that moment, something inside me didn't break. It crystallized. They called me a parasite, a burden, a leech, so I became invisible. While they sipped champagne in Paris, I sold the house they thought they owned, emptied every account, erased every trace. And when they returned home smiling and suntanned, their key didn't turn. The house was empty. The lights were off. And in the middle of the floor, I left them a note. "Surprise, the leech did this." But that was just the beginning. Because what they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I wasn't even his daughter. And the truth? The truth was going to destroy them. My name is Rachel Curtis. I'm 37 years old, and on paper, I'm everything I ever dreamed of becoming: a successful real estate broker with a 6-figure income, a carefully curated investment portfolio, and the kind of professional reputation that takes years to build. But here's what the business cards and LinkedIn profile don't tell you: I'm also the loneliest woman I know. The call came on a Tuesday evening. I remember because Tuesdays were when I usually treated myself to take out from the Italian place down the street, a small indulgence after another long week of showings and closings and negotiations. I'd just settled onto my sofa with chicken marsala when my phone buzzed with my father's name. I should mention that my apartment is modest. Not because I can't afford better, but because I've learned not to draw attention to my success. My family has a way of making my achievements feel like provocations, as if every milestone I reach is somehow a personal insult to them. So I live quietly in a 2-bedroom apartment with furniture from West Elm and art from local galleries, while the house I actually own, the $890,000 property, with the wraparound porch and the garden my mother always wanted, sits 20 minutes away with my parents and younger brother David living in it rent-free. I picked up the phone expecting the usual. Another request, probably. Maybe the water heater needed replacing again, or David needed help with another temporary setback. At 33, my brother had perfected the art of temporary setbacks. "Hi, Dad," I said, but he didn't respond. I heard voices in the background. My father's laugh, that distinctive bark I'd known my whole life. My mother's lighter tone. David's voice chiming in. They were having a conversation, and it took me several seconds to realize they had no idea I was listening. My father had forgotten to hang up. I should have disconnected. Any reasonable person would have. But something made me stay on the line. The phone pressed against my ear as I sat perfectly still on my sofa, the takeout forgotten. "She's nothing but a leech," my father said, his voice clear and casual, like he was commenting on the weather. The word hit me like a physical blow. Leech. My mother's response was worse because of how she laughed. Not a nervous laugh or an uncomfortable one, but genuine amusement. Always so desperate for our attention. "Did you see that text she sent about Thanksgiving? I'd love to host this year." As if we'd want to spend the holiday in that cramped little apartment of hers. The apartment they'd never actually visited. The apartment they'd never asked to visit. David's voice joined in, and I could picture him leaning back in the leather recliner I'd bought for the living room, the one he'd claimed as his own the day it was delivered. "The funny thing is, she actually thinks buying us stuff makes her family, like she can purchase her way into mattering." They all laughed together. The sound of my family bonding united in their assessment of me. I sat frozen, my hand gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles went white. Part of me wanted to scream into the receiver to let them know I'd heard every word. But a larger part of me needed to hear more, needed to understand the full scope of how they saw me. "Well, at least she's useful," my mother said, and I could hear the sound of ice clinking in a glass. Were they drinking the wine I'd brought over last week? The expensive Cabernet from the vineyard I'd visited on a business trip? After she gets back from that conference in Seattle, we'll tell her about the emergency with the roof. She'll write another check without question. There was no emergency with the roof. I'd had it inspected 6 months ago. "She always does," David agreed. "Remember when I told her my car got totaled 15 grand just like that? The car wasn't even totaled. I just wanted a newer model." More laughter. They were laughing about deceiving me, about using me, about the years I'd spent trying to be good enough, helpful enough, generous enough to earn what they gave David without him ever asking. I'd been sending my parents $2,000 a month for expenses. I'd paid for David's last 3 emergencies. I'd covered their vacation to Europe just 2 weeks ago, $20,000 for first-class flights and luxury hotels. And this entire time, this was how they saw me. But it was what my father said next that made everything else fall away. "If only she weren't mine to begin with." His voice carried something beyond frustration or disappointment. It was pure, undiluted resentment. The words hung in the air, and in the silence that followed, I heard my mother's soft sigh of agreement. If only she weren't mine to begin with. Not, "I wish I'd raised her differently." Not, "I wish things were different between us." But a fundamental rejection of my very existence in his life, as if I were a burden assigned to him by cruel fate, rather than a daughter he'd chosen to raise. The phone stayed pressed against my ear long after they'd moved on to discussing dinner plans. My hand trembled, but the rest of me had gone perfectly still. Something inside me wasn't breaking. It was crystallizing, transforming from soft hope into something harder and colder. I'd spent 37 years trying to earn their love, trying to be successful enough, generous enough, quiet enough, undemanding enough. I'd made myself small and given them everything, believing that eventually someday they'd look at me the way they looked at David, with pride, with affection, with love. But what he said next made me question everything I thought I knew about my life. I stayed on the line, unable to move, unable to breathe. The conversation continued, oblivious to my presence on the other end. "She's so pathetic," my mother said, and I could hear the contempt dripping from every syllable. "Always trying to prove herself to us. Do you remember last Christmas when she brought those expensive gifts? She wrapped them herself, had those little cards with handwritten notes, like we're supposed to be impressed by her penmanship." I did remember. I'd spent hours finding the perfect gifts, things I knew they'd mentioned wanting throughout the year. My mother had opened hers a cashmere scarf from Nordstrom and said simply, "Oh, how nice," before setting it aside and never wearing it. I'd found it months later, still in its box, shoved in the back of her closet when I'd been looking for extra hangers. David's laugh cut through my thoughts, sharp and cruel. The funny thing? She actually believes we care about her, like genuinely believes it. Last month, she sent me that long text about feeling disconnected from the family, asking if we could do a weekly dinner or something. I didn't even respond. I remembered that text. I'd revised it 6 times, trying to strike the right tone, not too needy, not too demanding. Just a simple suggestion that maybe we could spend more time together. The lack of response had stung, but I'd convinced myself David was just busy. He was always busy, always dealing with some crisis or another that required my financial intervention, but never my actual presence. "Speaking of Rachel's money," my mother said, and I heard papers rustling in the background. "That European trip was absolutely divine. $20,000 well spent, if I do say so myself. The hotel in Paris had the most incredible breakfast spread, and the wine tour in Tuscany phenomenal. $20,000. I'd wired it without hesitation when they'd asked, thrilled they wanted to take a family trip even if I couldn't join because of work obligations. They'd posted photos on Facebook sunset over the Eiffel Tower gondola rides in Venice Tapas in Barcelona. I'd liked every single one, leaving comments about how happy I was they were having a wonderful time. Not one of them had responded to my comments. "We should definitely do that again," David said. "Maybe Greece next time. I've always wanted to see Santorini." My mother's voice turned thoughtful, calculating. "We'll need to wait a bit, let her recover financially, but I'm thinking we hit her with the medical emergency story next week when she's back from Seattle. Something serious, but not too serious. Maybe your father's heart acting up. Some tests that aren't covered by insurance." My father's heart was fine. He'd had a full physical 2 months ago, and I'd driven him to the appointment myself. "She'll hand over another $20,000 without question," my mother continued. "She always does. It's really quite remarkable how predictable she is." The words hit me like physical blows, each one landing with precision. They weren't just taking my money, they were planning it, strategizing it, turning my love for them into a business model. "We have to be smart about it, though," David added, and I could hear the eagerness in his voice. "Remember last year when I told her about the car accident that got us 15 grand? But then, 3 months later, when Mom said she needed dental work, Rachel asked why the insurance wasn't covering it. We should rotate the emergencies more carefully, space them out, make sure the stories don't overlap or contradict each other." They had a system, an actual system for exploiting me. "Your brother's right," my father said. "We've been doing this for 5 years now. We've gotten sloppy. Need to keep better records of what we've already used. Can't have her getting suspicious." 5 years. 5 years of manufactured crises, fabricated emergencies, calculated lies. I thought back through them all. David's totaled car, my mother's emergency dental work, my father's legal troubles that never quite materialized into actual court dates, the roof repairs that the house never received. Tens of thousands of dollars, maybe more. I'd never kept track because I'd never thought I needed to. They were family. Family helps each other. "Don't feel guilty about it," my father continued, his voice firm. "She owes us. We raised her, didn't we? Put a roof over her head, food on the table. Every dollar we get from her is just collecting what's owed. It's not stealing if you're taking back what you're entitled to." Entitled to. As if my childhood, that lonely, cold childhood where I always felt like an outsider in my own home, was some kind of loan I was now obligated to repay with interest. "Exactly," my mother agreed. "And honestly, what else would she do with her money? She has no life, no real friends that I can see, no husband, no children. At least this way we make her feel needed, like she has a purpose. We're doing her a favor, really, giving her something to contribute to." They laughed together, then all three of them, the sound intimate and warm. This was family bonding. This was what brought them together. Not love, not shared history or affection, but the systematic exploitation of someone they'd decided had no other value. The call ended eventually. I heard my father say something about dinner reservations, heard the click as the line went dead. But I stayed frozen on my sofa, the phone still pressed against my ear, listening to the empty silence that followed. My chicken marsala had gone cold. Outside my window, the city continued its evening routine, cars, passing people walking dogs, someone's laughter floating up from the street below. The world kept turning completely indifferent to the fact that mine had just shattered. But strange thing was, I wasn't crying anymore. The tears that had started when I first heard my father call me a leech had dried up somewhere during their casual discussion of how to best extract my next payment. My hands had stopped shaking. My breath had steadied. I set the phone down carefully on the coffee table and looked around my apartment, my modest, carefully maintained apartment that they'd mocked without ever seeing. I looked at the life I'd built, the success I'd achieved completely on my own without their help or encouragement or support. And for the first time in 37 years, I saw it clearly. I had never been their daughter. I had been their mark. Every sacrifice I'd made, every boundary I'd crossed, every time I'd chosen their needs over my own, it had all been theater. A performance for an audience that had never been watching with love, only with calculation. How much could they get? How long could they keep the scam running? The pain in my chest transformed. It didn't disappear, but it changed, crystallized into something harder and colder and infinitely more useful than grief. They thought I was pathetic, desperate, predictable. They thought they knew me. That's when I stopped crying and started planning. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of tea that went cold hours ago, and I let myself remember everything I'd spent years trying to forget. I was 16 when I got my first real job at the grocery store on Market Street. Not because I wanted spending money or to save for something special, but because I needed school supplies and my parents had made it clear those weren't in the budget. "You're old enough to handle your own expenses," my father had said, barely looking up from his newspaper. That same week, David got a brand new Honda Civic for his 14th birthday. Not used, not practical new with leather seats and a premium sound system. I remembered standing in the driveway watching him run his hands over the hood while our parents beamed with pride, and thinking maybe if I worked harder, proved myself more, I'd earn that kind of gesture too. I never did. By 17, I was working 2 jobs, the grocery store during the week and weekend shifts at a coffee shop. I bought my own clothes, paid for my own AP exam fees, saved every penny for college applications. When my acceptance letter came from State University with a full academic scholarship, I'd run into the living room waving the envelope, barely able to contain my excitement. My mother had glanced at it and said, "Well, thank goodness for that scholarship. We certainly couldn't have afforded to send you." My father added, "Just don't let it go to your head. Plenty of people get scholarships." David, sprawled on the couch playing video games, hadn't even looked up. My college graduation was on a sunny Saturday in May. I'd graduated summa cum laude with a double major in business and finance. I'd sent them the invitation months in advance, called to remind them, even offered to pay for their hotel. They didn't come. My mother said they had a prior commitment, David's recreational baseball game. He was 20 years old, playing in an amateur league that didn't matter, and that took priority over my college graduation. I'd walked across that stage, accepted my diploma, and scanned the audience for faces I knew wouldn't be there. The memories kept coming, each one a small cut I'd ignored at the time, convincing myself it wasn't that bad, that I was being too sensitive, that family was complicated. When I bought my first property at 24, a modest condo I'd saved for and negotiated myself, my mother's first question was, "Why didn't you get something bigger? Something the whole family could use?" Not congratulations, not pride in my accomplishment, just disappointment that I hadn't purchased real estate with them in mind. When I got my broker's license at 26, my father said I'd gotten lucky in a good market. When I made my first 6-figure year at 29, my mother told me money isn't everything, and suggested I'd be happier if I focused on finding a husband instead of chasing commissions. Every milestone, every achievement, every moment I'd hoped would finally make them see me, all of it was either dismissed or diminished, or turned into evidence of my fundamental inadequacy. Meanwhile, David failed out of community college twice, couldn't hold a job for more than 6 months, and was currently 33 years old, living in my house without paying rent. And they adored him, worried about him, made excuses for him. He was finding himself. He was going through a tough time. He just needed a little support to get back on his feet. The pattern had always been there. I'd just been too desperate for their love to see it clearly. I got up from the table as dawn broke through my kitchen window and retrieved my laptop. The eerie calm that had settled over me hadn't lifted. If anything, it had deepened, sharpening my thoughts into crystalline clarity. I opened a new spreadsheet and started making lists. Properties in my name, the house they lived in titled solely to me, the condo I'd bought at 24 and now rented out, 2 investment properties in the neighboring county, all mine, all generating income, all completely under my control. Bank accounts, my primary, checking and savings, both solely in my name. The joint account I'd opened years ago for family emergencies that somehow only ever flowed one direction out. My business accounts, my retirement accounts, my investment portfolios. Credit cards I'd made my parents and David authorized users on one of my cards years ago for emergencies. I pulled up the statement. Restaurants, shopping, entertainment. Thousands of dollars a month in charges that had nothing to do with emergencies and everything to do with living beyond their means on my credit. I kept typing, kept cataloging, and with each line item I felt something shift inside me. They'd been treating me like an ATM for years, extracting money with the casual entitlement of people using their own funds. But here was the truth. They'd never bothered to investigate. I owned everything. The house, the accounts, the credit, all of it was in my name. They'd been so confident in their control over me, so certain of my desperate need for their approval, that they'd never asked a single question about legal ownership or financial details. Their arrogance had made them completely, utterly vulnerable. I could see it all now with perfect clarity. The monthly transfers I made to their checking account, I controlled those. The credit card they used without limit, I issued that. The house they lived in, I held the deed. They thought they were playing me, but I'd been holding all the cards the entire time. I just hadn't realized I was in a game. The sun was fully up now, my apartment filling with morning light. I saved the spreadsheet and closed my laptop. The decision had been forming all night, solidifying with each memory, each line item, each moment of crystalline understanding. I didn't want confrontation. I didn't want to hear them defend themselves or make excuses or offer the hollow apologies people give when they're caught but not actually sorry. I didn't want to see my mother cry calculated tears or watch my father bluster with false indignation or listen to David promise to change. None of that would be real. None of that would matter. What I wanted was simpler and far more complete. I wanted to disappear. Not physically, I wasn't running away. But I would remove myself so thoroughly from their lives that they'd finally understand what my absence actually meant. They'd spent years making me feel like a burden, a leech, a pathetic hanger-on desperate for scraps of affection. Now they would learn what it meant to carry their own weight. This wasn't revenge born from rage or pain or wounded pride. This was something colder and purer justice born from clarity. And it would be executed with the same precision and planning I brought to my most complex real estate deals. Revenge doesn't scream. It whispers and then vanishes. The plan began to take shape with the methodical precision I'd always brought to my work. I sat at my desk that morning, pulled up my files, and realized something that made me smile for the first time in days. I'd already started this process 2 months ago. I just hadn't known what I was really doing. It had been late June when David called with another crisis. His transmission had failed, he said, and he needed $6,000 immediately, or he'd lose his job because he couldn't get to work. Never mind that I'd bought him a reliable used Toyota just 18 months earlier. Never mind that transmission failures on newer vehicles were rare and usually covered by warranty. I'd wired the money that same day like I always did, but something about that particular request had stuck with me. Maybe it was the rehearsed quality of his panic, or the way he'd hung up the moment the transfer confirmed without even saying thank you. The next morning, I'd called Marcus Chen, a commercial real estate broker I'd worked with on several investment properties. Marcus was discreet professional and knew how to handle delicate situations. I need to list a property quietly, I'd told him. No public listings, no open houses. Find me serious buyers only. The house had appraised at $890,000. It was a beautiful colonial with 4 bedrooms, hardwood floors throughout, and the kind of mature landscaping that takes decades to establish. I'd purchased it 5 years ago with money my grandmother left me when she passed. I remembered the reading of the will sitting in the lawyer's mahogany-paneled office, while he'd explained that my grandmother had left me exactly $300,000 with explicit instructions that it was for Rachel Curtis alone to secure her future independence. But my family had been there too, and the moment we left the lawyer's office, my mother had taken my hand. "Your grandmother would want us to stay close," she'd said, her voice soft and loving in a way it so rarely was with me. "She always valued family above everything. You should use this money to buy a home where we can all be together." That's what she would have wanted. My father had nodded solemnly. It's what family does, Rachel. We take care of each other. I'd been 28 years old, still desperate to believe I could earn their love, still willing to twist my grandmother's clear wishes into whatever shape would make them happy. I'd bought the house, added my savings to make up the difference, and watched them move in like it had always been theirs. They'd never paid a single month of mortgage, never contributed to property taxes or insurance or maintenance. The deed had only my name on it, but they'd treated it as theirs by right. Now, sitting at my desk with Marcus's latest email open in front of me, I understood what my grandmother had actually been trying to do. She'd been trying to give me an escape route, and I'd used it to dig myself deeper into their trap, until now. The timing had been almost too perfect. In early July, my family had started planning their European vacation, the $20,000 extravaganza I'd funded. They'd booked flights for late August, a 3-week tour through France, Italy, and Spain. I'd sent the 60-day notice to vacate on July 1st, certified mail return receipt requested. My mother had called me laughing. "Very funny, Rachel. Your little joke. We know you don't mean it." My father had been less amused. "This is what happens when you give someone a little success. Goes straight to their head. You'd better not pull any of your emotional stunts while we're trying to enjoy our vacation." David hadn't bothered to call at all. They'd left for Europe on August 22nd, posting their first vacation photos before their plane even landed. Meanwhile, Marcus had found me a buyer, a cash investor looking for rental properties in good neighborhoods, willing to close quickly and asking minimal questions. The offer came in at $875,000, and I'd accepted it immediately. The closing was scheduled for September 5th, precisely 3 days before my family's return flight. I'd met with my attorney Jennifer Walsh in her downtown office last week. She'd reviewed every document with meticulous care, the deed showing sole ownership, the notice to vacate. I'd properly served the purchase agreement, the closing timeline. When she'd finished, she'd looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Rachel, I have to ask, are you absolutely certain about this? Once the sale completes, there's no undoing it. Your family will come home to find they no longer have access to this property. There will be consequences, likely legal ones. They may sue, though they won't have grounds. But are you prepared for the fallout?" I'd met her eyes without hesitation. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." She'd nodded and started preparing the final paperwork. But something else had emerged during my preparation, something that made me realize this story went deeper than I'd imagined. While organizing documents for the sale, I'd pulled my mother's old financial records from the filing cabinet where I'd stored them after her death 3 years ago. My mother had died suddenly at 58, a heart attack, they'd said, though she'd had no history of heart disease. I'd been the one to handle her estate, such as it was, because my father had claimed he was too grief-stricken to deal with paperwork. Going through those records now with clear eyes, I'd noticed something I'd missed before. Large transfers, 20,000 here, 30,000 there, labeled estate transfers, going back almost 15 years. Money moving from my mother's accounts into accounts I didn't recognize. The amounts were substantial, and there were dozens of them. My mother had worked as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm. She'd been good with numbers, careful with money. Where had these funds come from, and where had they gone? The accounts receiving the transfers had alphanumeric codes instead of names, the kind of notation that suggested intentional obfuscation. I'd made copies of everything, added them to a folder I was beginning to think of as evidence rather than family history. There was more here, more to uncover about my mother's life and death, more deception layered beneath the deception I'd already discovered. But first, I needed to finish what I'd started. I needed to complete this exit, to cut the ties that had been strangling me for 37 years. The closing was tomorrow. My family would return from Europe in 2 weeks, tanned and refreshed, and already planning their next fabricated emergency. In 2 weeks, they'd return to find everything gone. Their first post appeared on my feed at 6 in the morning. I was already awake, had been for hours, finalizing documents for the closing scheduled for that afternoon. My phone buzzed with the notification, and there they were. My father, Mother and David standing in front of the Trevi Fountain in Rome, all three of them beaming at the camera with the kind of joy I'd never seen them direct at me. The caption read, "So blessed to have such a generous daughter who made this dream trip possible. Family is everything." A heart emoji, prayer hands, the generic language of social media gratitude that costs nothing and means less. The comments rolled in within minutes. "Your daughter is so wonderful," wrote one of my mother's book club friends. "You raised her right," added someone from my father's golf club. "What an amazing family," commented a neighbor I'd helped move heavy furniture for just last year. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee cooling in my cup, and watched the likes accumulate. 100, 200, 300 people validating the fiction that we were a loving, close-knit family, that I was the devoted daughter, that they were the grateful, proud parents. I clicked through to my mother's profile and found more. A photo of her and my father at a sidewalk cafe in Paris, wine glasses raised to the camera. "Living our best life thanks to our incredible Rachel." Another of David posing in front of the Colosseum, his arms spread wide. "Big sis always comes through for family. Big sis." He'd never called me that to my face. In person, I was Rachel, or more often just a text message request with a dollar amount attached. I opened Instagram and found even more carefully curated moments. Designer shopping bags from Milan, a sunset dinner cruise on the Seine, my mother trying on expensive sunglasses in a boutique on the Spanish Steps. Each post tagged with family-blessed, grateful vacation goals. They'd created an entire narrative of family love and daughterly devotion, and hundreds of people were consuming it without question. What they didn't know, what they couldn't see, was the private family group chat I'd discovered 3 months ago when my father had accidentally included me in a message meant for David. I'd never told them I could see it. I just quietly watched, reading every message they sent about me when they thought I wasn't listening. The messages from Europe were particularly enlightening. David had written yesterday, "She's so easy to manipulate. I'm already planning my next emergency. Thinking maybe a dental thing, she always falls for medical stuff." My mother's response, "Wait at least a month after we get back. Can't believe she fell for the medical emergency again. Woman has zero critical thinking skills." My father, "Stupid tax. That's all it is. She pays stupid tax for being stupid enough to trust us." They'd sent these messages while posting photos thanking me publicly. The cognitive dissonance was staggering, or it would have been if I hadn't already accepted what they were. This wasn't hypocrisy born of weakness or confusion. This was calculated narcissism, the kind that maintains a perfect public image while privately feeling nothing but contempt for the person funding it. I scrolled through another album posted just hours ago. My family at the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, posing in front of Botticelli's Birth of Venus. My mother had captioned it, "Art, culture, and quality time with my boys. Rachel, we miss you. Wish you could be here." She'd never wished I could be there. When I'd asked if I could join them, even offering to pay my own way in addition to funding their trip, my mother had said the dates wouldn't work with my busy schedule. I'd checked later and found she'd deliberately given me the wrong dates, booking the trip for a week, when she knew I had closing scheduled. I noticed David had posted a photo too, him with his arm around both parents, all three of them grinning in front of some medieval church in Siena. The devoted son, the loving family. In the photo, he wore a watch I recognized a Tag Heuer I'd bought him for his 30th birthday, $2,000, because he'd said it would help him look professional for job interviews. He'd never gone to the interviews. Just last month, David had texted me at 11 at night. "Can you cover my rent? I'll pay you back, I promise. Just got hit with unexpected expenses." I'd sent him $1,500. He'd responded with a thumbs-up emoji and nothing else. No thank you, no explanation of the unexpected expenses, no follow-up of any kind. And certainly no repayment because there never was. None of them ever paid me back. Not David, not my parents, not once in 15 years of loans that we all knew weren't loans at all. But they maintained the fiction to my face while calling it stupid tax behind my back. The stupid tax I paid for being stupid enough to love them. I closed Instagram and checked the time. 2 in the afternoon. In 3 hours, I'd be sitting in the title company's office signing the papers that would transfer ownership of the house they believed was theirs. The house they'd lived in for 5 years without contributing a single dollar. The house they'd convinced me to buy by exploiting my grandmother's death and my desperate need to believe they loved me. My phone buzzed again. Another post this time from Rome. My father had uploaded a photo of the 3 of them at a restaurant, champagne flutes, raised plates of pasta, and what looked like ossobuco artfully arranged on white tablecloth. Toasting to family and the good life, grateful for every blessing. I looked at the timestamp. Posted 6 minutes ago. Right now, at this exact moment, they were sitting in that restaurant drinking expensive champagne, eating expensive food, celebrating their expensive vacation. All funded by the woman they'd called a leech. All made possible by someone they saw as nothing more than a reliable income stream. While they toasted to family in Rome. I gathered my documents, put on my professional suit, and prepared to drive to the title company. In exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes, I would sign the closing papers. The sale price, $890,000. The funds would deposit directly into my secured offshore account, completely untraceable to them. I'd calculated everything down to the day. They would land at the airport on September 23rd at 4 in the afternoon. The house would be completely emptied on the 22nd. All utilities would be shut off on the 22nd. The credit card I'd stupidly made them authorized users on would be canceled on the 22nd. By the time they stepped off that plane, tanned and relaxed, and already planning their next fictional emergency, every thread connecting me to their lives would be severed. I allowed myself one small smile as I picked up my car keys. They were sipping champagne in France. They had no idea their home had just been sold. The closing took 45 minutes. I signed my name 23 times, initialed forms, verified wiring instructions, and watched the title company representative notarize each document with practiced efficiency. When it was done, Jennifer walked me to my car. "The house is officially yours until the buyers take possession on the 22nd, she said. "That gives you 8 days to remove anything you want to keep." I didn't need 8 days. I needed 3. I drove to the house the next morning with a team of professional movers I'd hired through a company that specialized in estate clearances. They were discreet, efficient, and asked no questions. I'd given them a detailed inventory, every piece of furniture I'd purchased, every appliance, every item I could prove I'd paid for. The list was extensive because over 5 years I'd furnished an entire house trying to create the warmth I'd never felt. The movers arrived at 8. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, and for the first time in 5 years I felt something I'd never experienced in this space: complete freedom. Previously, this house had been theirs in every way that mattered. My father controlled the thermostat, my mother dictated the decor, David claimed the best parking spot. I'd been a guest in a home I owned, always careful not to intrude, always asking permission to access my own property. Even when I visited, there were rooms I didn't enter without invitation, spaces I didn't touch without explicit approval. Not anymore. The movers worked with choreographed efficiency. The leather sofa I'd bought when they complained their old one was uncomfortable loaded onto the truck. The dining room table where I was never invited for Sunday dinners dismantled and wrapped. The television, the chairs, the lamps, the area rugs. Piece by piece the house emptied. I watched from the kitchen doorway as my attempts to buy belonging were carried away in labeled boxes. By noon, the main floor was bare. The movers moved upstairs, and I followed my footsteps echoing in the hollow spaces. David's room was first the gaming chair I'd bought him, the desk, the expensive computer setup. Gone. My parents' room next, the king-sized bed, the dresser set the bedside tables. All of it purchased by me, all of it claimed by them without a second thought. Then I stood in front of the door I'd been forbidden to open for 3 years. My mother's walk-in closet. After she died, my father had declared it off limits. Too painful. He'd said, his voice thick with what I'd believed was grief. We can't disturb her things. Not yet. My mother had been gone for 3 years, but the closet remained locked, preserved like a shrine, and I'd respected that boundary because I thought it meant they'd loved her. Now I understood it differently. I tried the handle. Locked. I retrieved a screwdriver from my toolkit in the car and worked the simple lock until it gave way. The door swung open, releasing the stale air of a space sealed for too long. My mother's clothes still hung on the rod blouses and skirts, and the practical cardigans she'd worn to her bookkeeping job. Her shoes lined the floor beneath. But at the back, pushed behind winter coats that would never be worn again, I saw something that didn't belong. A wooden box small enough to hold in 2 hands with a tarnished brass lock. I pulled it out, sat on the floor of the empty bedroom, and examined it. The lock was old but sturdy. I used the screwdriver as a lever, applying pressure until the wood splintered and the mechanism gave way. Inside were letters. Not many, maybe a dozen, written on cream-colored stationery in elegant handwriting. I unfolded the first one carefully, the paper thin with age, and began to read. They were love letters. Real ones, the kind people wrote before texts and emails made romance disposable. They were addressed to my mother, signed by someone named Thomas, and they spoke of a future that clearly never happened. Plans for a life together, dreams of travel, promises of devotion. The most recent was dated 38 years ago, just before my mother married my father. Beneath the letters was a photograph. Its colors faded, but still clear enough to see. My mother, young and radiantly happy, standing beside a handsome man with kind eyes. They were holding hands, and the joy in their faces was so genuine it made my chest ache. I turned the photo over and found words in my mother's handwriting, the life I should have had. But there was more. Printed emails. The paper slightly yellowed, dated from throughout my childhood and teenage years. All from Thomas Brennan. All asking if my mother was okay, if she needed help, if there was anything he could do. The emails were gentle, concerned, carefully worded to respect boundaries while making clear the offer of support stood permanently open. There were no replies. Not a single response from my mother. Had she never seen these? Had someone intercepted them, printed them and hidden them away as evidence or insurance, or simply cruel proof that she'd lost her chance at happiness? I sat on that floor for 20 minutes, reading and rereading the letters and emails, studying the photograph of my mother's face, before whatever happened to break her spirit. This woman in the picture looked nothing like the tired, defeated person I'd known growing up. This woman was alive. The movers called up the stairs. "Ma'am, we're done with everything on your list. Is there anything else?" I carefully placed everything back in the box and carried it with me downstairs. "That's everything," I told them. "Thank you." They left with the last load, 3 trucks full of furniture and belongings headed for storage units and donation centers. I stood in the empty living room and did a final walkthrough. The kitchen bare counters, empty cabinets. I opened the breaker panel and switched off the main power. The refrigerator's hum died. The digital clocks went dark. The bathrooms I called the water company and scheduled disconnection for the 22nd. Same with the gas company, the internet provider, the trash service. The credit cards I logged into my account and removed their authorized user status. Decades of charges stopped with a few clicks. I walked through each empty room one final time. My footsteps echoed off bare walls. The house felt dead, which was appropriate. It had never been alive with love or warmth. It had been a stage set for a performance that only I believed was real. In the center of the living room floor, I placed a single item, a sheet of white paper with words written in red ink. Not many words, just enough. I locked the door for the last time, walked to my car where the new owner's agent was waiting, and handed her the keys. She smiled, thanked me, said something about the buyers being excited to move in. I nodded, got in my car, and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. I left one thing behind, a note they would never forget. I'd written the note 3 days before I placed it in that empty house. It had taken me longer to compose those 5 words than it took to draft most real estate contracts. I'd started with paragraphs. Pages, actually. Everything I wanted to say about the years of manipulation, the systematic exploitation, the psychological abuse disguised as family obligation. I wrote about the overheard phone call, about discovering their private messages mocking me while publicly praising me. I detailed every fake emergency, every manipulated guilt trip, every time they'd made me feel small while taking everything I offered. Then I deleted it all. They didn't deserve my explanation. More importantly, they didn't deserve my pain laid out for their examination. Explanations implied I was still seeking their understanding, still hoping they might suddenly develop the capacity for empathy or remorse. I was done hoping for things they couldn't give. What they deserved was simplicity, clarity, their own words handed back to them like a mirror. I tried different versions. The leech is done. Too final, too obvious. Regards, your leech. Too bitter, too much emotion showing through. I needed something that would make them work for it, that would let the horror dawn slowly, rather than hitting them all at once. Then I remembered my father's exact words from that phone call. She's nothing but a leech. And I knew. Surprise! The leech did this. 5 words that said everything and nothing. Surprise, acknowledging that they never saw me as capable of action, only of reaction. The leech, their word, their contempt handed back to them without comment. Did this simple past tense matter-of-fact, undeniable? No signature, no explanation, no appeal to conscience or family or the years we'd supposedly shared. Just a statement of fact that would force them to confront what they'd created. I printed it on plain white paper, the kind you'd use for any mundane document. But I printed it in red ink, and I didn't examine too closely why I chose that color. My conscious mind said it was for visibility, for impact. But something deeper recognized the choice red was the color my mother had used for her personal correspondence. I'd found dozens of notes in her handwriting in that wooden box, annotations on letters, notes in the margins of printed emails. All in red ink, like she was correcting someone else's story, trying to mark her truth in the only way she could. I was marking my truth now. In her color. Maybe it was unconscious homage. Maybe it was claiming her strength for myself. Either way, the red ink felt right. The placement had been strategic too. I'd considered the kitchen counter visible but easily dismissed as junk mail or a note from a contractor. I'd considered taping it to the refrigerator too, domestic, too much like a family message board reminder to pick up milk. I'd thought about leaving it on the master bedroom pillow, too intimate, too much like I was still thinking of them in personal terms. The center of the living room floor was perfect, impossible to miss when they walked in, impossible to contextualize as anything other than a deliberate message. They'd have to walk around it or pick it up, and either way, they'd have to acknowledge it. It would be the first thing they saw in that empty house, the only object in a void where their comfortable life used to be. I'd imagined their faces when they read it. My father would be confused first, the leech. What leech? Then the memory would surface of his own words spoken so casually on that phone call he'd forgotten to end. The confusion would shift to realization then, to something approaching fear. My mother would grasp it faster, her hand flying to her mouth. David would probably laugh nervously before the implications sank in. But the real impact would come in the hours after, when they'd replayed every conversation, every request for money, every private message where they'd mocked me. They'd realize I knew, had known. And while knowing, had methodically dismantled their entire existence with the same cold calculation they'd used on me for years. The note would haunt them because it was a ghost of their own cruelty given form and left in an empty house that used to be their security. I'd stood in that living room for a long time after placing it there, the paper stark white against the hardwood floor, the red letters bold and unwavering. The house was so quiet. No hum of refrigerator, no ticking of clocks, no ambient noise of a lived-in space. Just silence, and that note waiting. I'd thought about my mother then, about the photograph of her young and happy with a man named Thomas Brennan. I'd thought about the emails she'd never responded to, the life she'd lost, the slow suffocation of living with people who saw her as an obstacle to their plans, rather than a person deserving of love. She'd died in this house 3 years ago. The official cause was heart failure, But I wondered now if it wasn't something else. A different kind of failure. The failure of hope. The failure of dreams deferred too long. The failure of a spirit worn down by daily indifference masquerading as family. "I'm doing what you couldn't, Mom," I'd whispered to the empty air. "I'm getting out. I'm choosing myself. I'm refusing to die slowly in a place that was never really home." I'd walked to the door, turned the lock, and heard it click into place with a finality that felt like punctuation. The end of a sentence I'd been writing for 37 years. I'd handed the keys to the new owner's agent, gotten in my car, and started the engine. As I'd pulled away from the curb, I'd kept my eyes forward. I didn't look at the house in my rearview mirror, didn't allow myself one last glance. The past was literally behind me now, shrinking with distance, and I'd learned enough to know that looking back only gives the past power it doesn't deserve. Forward was the only direction that mattered. Forward into whatever life looked like when you stopped performing for an audience that never applauded. Forward into the unknown territory of living for yourself, rather than for the impossible task of earning love from people incapable of giving it. The note would be waiting for them when they returned, patient and implacable. 5 words that would shatter the fiction they'd been living. In 3 days, they would land. And their nightmare would begin. I wasn't there when they came home. I was 300 miles away in Seattle at a real estate conference, sitting in a hotel room with my laptop open and my phone within reach. But I saw everything. The neighbor, Mrs. Patricia Henderson, had always been kind to me during my brief visits to the house. She'd sent me the video 40 minutes after my family landed, along with a text that read, "I think you should see this." I watched it 3 times. The footage started with my family's Uber pulling into the driveway at 4:37 in the afternoon. They looked exactly like people returning from an expensive vacation, tanned, relaxed, weighed down with designer luggage. My father stretched as he got out, saying something that made my mother laugh. David was on his phone, probably already composing his next request for money. "Best 3 weeks of my life." My mother's voice came through clearly on the video. Mrs. Henderson must have been in her front garden close enough to hear. "We should do Asia next," David said, hoisting a Louis Vuitton bag over his shoulder. "Thailand, maybe Japan. Rachel's always good for it." My father laughed, that distinctive bark I knew so well. "Next time we'll plan it better. Hit more 5-star restaurants. She won't know the difference between 20,000 and 30. They were already planning the next extraction before they'd even unpacked from this one. David reached the front door first, fumbling with his keyring. I watched him insert the key, try to turn it, frown. He pulled it out, examined it, tried again. Nothing. "Did someone change the locks?" he called over his shoulder, his voice carrying the first edge of confusion. "Don't be ridiculous," my father said, but he was already walking up the front steps, his own keys out. I watched him try his key once, twice, 3 times. The confusion on his face was almost comical. My mother's voice rose slightly. "This doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't the keys work?" Mrs. Henderson's camera stayed steady, capturing everything. She'd moved closer now, standing at the property line between her yard and what used to be my family's driveway. I could see another neighbor had emerged from across the street, drawn by the commotion. The video jumped forward. Mrs. Henderson had edited out the next 20 minutes, but her timestamp showed they'd been there for almost half an hour when the locksmith's van pulled up. My family practically ran to meet him, my mother already talking before he'd even gotten out of his vehicle. The locksmith was a middle-aged man with a professional demeanor that didn't change even as my father's voice grew louder and more agitated. I watched him examine the locks with a penlight, then pull out a tablet from his van. "These were changed recently," he said, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. "I'll need permission from the property owner to open them." "I am the owner." My father's roar made Mrs. Henderson's camera shake slightly. "This is my house. I've lived here for 5 years." The locksmith's expression shifted to something between pity and wariness. He tapped at his tablet for a moment, then turned it to show my father. Sir, according to county property records, this property was sold 3 days ago. Current owner is listed as Westbrook Properties LLC. You'll need to contact them for access." The words hung in the air. I watched my mother's face in the background, saw the exact moment comprehension began to dawn. She grabbed the tablet from the locksmith's hands, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through the information. "Sold," she whispered. "It says sold. 3 days ago. But that's impossible. We were in Europe. We didn't sell anything." "The previous owner's name is listed as Rachel Curtis," the locksmith said, consulting his screen. "That's our daughter," David said, and his voice had gone hollow. "That's Rachel." Mrs. Henderson's camera had captured another neighbor now phone out and pointed at the scene. Then another. The spectacle of my family's distress was becoming neighborhood entertainment, and I felt nothing watching it. No satisfaction, no guilt, just a strange, detached observation of consequences unfolding exactly as planned. My mother was crying now, great heaving sobs that seemed to surprise even her. "She sold the house. While we were gone, she sold our house." "It was never your house," I said to my laptop screen, though of course they couldn't hear me. "It was always mine." The locksmith, moved by my mother's tears, or simply wanting to complete the job and leave, agreed to open the door. I watched him work the lock with professional efficiency, while my family stood behind him, their expensive luggage forgotten on the driveway. The door swung open. The camera angle shifted as Mrs. Henderson moved to get a better view. I could see into the front hallway, see the empty expanse of hardwood floor, where the console table used to stand, see the bare walls where artwork had hung. My family rushed inside, and Mrs. Henderson followed to the doorway, giving me a perfect view of what happened next. They stopped, all three of them frozen in the entrance to the empty living room. The furniture was gone, the curtains, the lamps. Everything I'd purchased over 5 years of trying to build something that felt like home. David moved first, walking like a sleepwalker into the middle of the room. His footsteps echoed. He turned in a slow circle, his mouth open. My mother followed, her hand pressed against her lips. "Everything," she breathed. "She took everything." "She didn't take anything," my father said, his voice strange and flat. "She removed everything she bought, because it was all hers." That's when David saw it. The note. White paper, red ink centered perfectly on the living room floor where it couldn't be missed. He bent down, picked it up, read it. I watched his face go pale, watched his hands start to shake. My mother grabbed it from him. Her eyes scanned the 5 words. I knew them by heart, had written them myself, and then she screamed. Not words just sound raw and animal. David grabbed the paper back, read it again as if the words might have changed. Surprise. The leech did this. My father had slid down the wall to sit on the bare floor, his head in his hands. He was making a sound like crying or maybe laughing. I couldn't tell which. Outside, Mrs. Henderson's camera kept recording, and across the street another neighbor had their phone out. And then the neighbors started recording. Mrs. Henderson's video appeared on TikTok at 6:15 that evening. I know because my phone started buzzing with notifications at 6:43, and by the time I opened the app, the video already had 500,000 views. The caption read, "Entitled family returns from Europe to find out their daughter sold the house they didn't own," followed by a skull emoji and a shocked face. The video had been edited down to 2 minutes of the most dramatic moments, my family's confusion turning to panic, the locksmith revealing the sale, my mother's scream when she read the note. I sat on my hotel bed and watched the view count climb in real time. 700,000, 800,000, 1 million. The comments section loaded slowly, overwhelmed by the volume of responses flooding in. I scrolled through them with clinical detachment, reading strangers dissect my family's behavior with the kind of brutal honesty I'd never been able to voice myself. "That daughter is a queen," had 300,000 likes and counting. "Imagine calling your child a leech, then being shocked when she stops funding your lifestyle," had been pinned by Mrs. Henderson herself. The audacity to vacation in Europe on her dime, then come home expecting more, had spawned an entire thread of people sharing their own stories of family financial abuse. By midnight, the video had 2 million views. By morning, it had passed 10 million. I barely slept. Not from guilt or second thoughts, but from watching the internet do what the internet does best: investigate, dissect, and expose. Someone had recognized my family from the video and found their social media accounts within hours. From there, the digital archaeology began. Screenshots started circulating. My mother's Facebook post from 2 weeks ago, the one with them at the Trevi Fountain. So blessed to have such a generous daughter who made this dream trip possible. Family is everything. The comments praising me, calling me wonderful, saying my parents raised me right. All of it preserved and shared with the kind of ironic appreciation that only the internet can muster. Then came the older posts. Someone had scrolled back through years of my mother's social media presence and found the subtle digs, the passive-aggressive comments that I'd seen but never fully registered as the abuse they were. A post from my college graduation where she'd written, "Rachel graduated today. Now maybe she'll finally settle down and focus on what really matters." And posted on the same day she hadn't bothered to attend the ceremony. A Father's Day post from 2 years ago where my father had thanked David for being the son who truly understands family values, with no mention of me at all, posted the same week I'd sent him $5,000 for emergency home repairs. A birthday post for David, showing a family dinner I hadn't been invited to, my mother's caption reading, "Celebrating with the people who matter most." The internet had found them all. Someone with too much time and impressive digital skills had created a side-by-side comparison video. On the left, my family's public posts thanking me, praising me, calling me generous and wonderful. On the right, their posts that excluded me, diminished me, or celebrated David while erasing my existence. The video was 4 minutes long and devastating in its thoroughness. It had 8 million views by the time I saw it. The narrative solidified with the speed and certainty that only social media can achieve. Entitled parents exploit successful daughter for years. Daughter finally stands up for herself. Parents shocked that actions have consequences. The story was too perfect, too aligned with themes that resonated across generations and demographics. My family became a cautionary tale, their faces and names now synonymous with narcissistic family abuse. Local news picked it up by the second day. I watched a segment from my hotel room where a family therapist discussed the signs of financial exploitation within families, using my situation as a case study without naming names. When adult children feel obligated to fund their parents' lifestyle while receiving no emotional support in return, that's not family, that's extortion with a biological component. Think pieces appeared in online magazines. The invisible abuse when family becomes financial predator. Why adult children have no obligation to fund their parents' retirement. The leech letter, one woman's perfect revenge against narcissistic family. The leech letter. That's what the internet had named my note. It was being quoted, analyzed, praised for its brevity and impact. Someone had made it into merchandise, coffee mugs, and t-shirts with, "Surprise, the leech did this," in red letters. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. My phone had been ringing constantly. Blocked number after blocked number, all of them my family trying to reach me from different phones after I'd blocked their personal numbers. I rejected every call, watched the voicemails pile up unheard. Then came the text message. My mother had somehow gotten a new phone, a number I didn't recognize. The message came through at 2 a.m. on the third day. "How could you do this to us? We're your family. Everything we did was because we loved you. How can you be so cruel?" I stared at the message for a long time. Loved me. They'd loved me. The word felt obscene coming from her, a violation of language itself. I typed one sentence and hit send. Did the parasite do enough damage? I didn't expect what happened next. My mother, in her desperation to paint me as the villain, screenshot my response and posted it to Facebook. Her caption read, "This is what my daughter said to me when I begged her to talk to us. This is the cruelty we're dealing with. Please pray for our family. She'd forgotten about the video. She'd forgotten that millions of people had watched my father call me a leech in Mrs. Henderson's recording. She'd forgotten that the internet never forgets. The comments on her post were immediate and merciless. "Parasite, isn't that what your husband called her in the video? So she's just throwing your own words back at you and you're mad about it. The audacity to call yourself victims when you were caught on camera calling your daughter names." Someone posted a clip from Mrs. Henderson's video with my father's voice, "She's nothing but a leech." Then my mother's response in the text claiming victimhood after using that exact language. The post went viral faster than the original video. Within 6 hours, it had been shared 50,000 times, each share accompanied by commentary about my mother's stunning lack of self-awareness. My family wasn't just entitled anymore. They were exposed as manipulative liars who'd been caught using the same cruel language they now claimed to be victims of. Major news outlets picked it up. Family caught in viral video tries to spin narrative, spectacularly backfires. The story had everything the internet loved: hypocrisy, comeuppance, and a clear villain getting exactly what they deserved. My phone buzzed with a new message, this time from a number with an unfamiliar area code. Rachel Curtis. "My name is Thomas Brennan. I knew your mother many years ago. I've been trying to find you for a long time. We need to talk." I stared at the message, my heart suddenly pounding. Thomas Brennan. The name from the letters, from the emails, from the photograph of my mother looking genuinely happy. But someone else saw that message. Someone who'd been looking for me for decades. Thomas Brennan's message sat unread on my phone for 3 days. I wasn't ready to confront whatever truth he represented. Not while I was still processing the viral explosion of my family's humiliation, not while journalists were emailing interview requests, not while the internet debated whether I was a hero or a monster. I'd returned from Seattle to my Portland apartment and tried to resume some version of normal life. Work calls, client meetings, the familiar routines that had always grounded me, but normal felt like a language I'd forgotten how to speak. On Thursday morning, my office phone rang. Security. "Ms. Curtis, there's someone here to see you. He says he's your brother." My hand tightened on the receiver. "Tell him I'm not available." "He said you'd say that. He says he has information about your mother that you need to hear. He looks pretty rough, ma'am. Says he'll wait as long as it takes." I closed my eyes. Information about my mother. The wooden box I'd found in her closet sat in my apartment, now the letters and photograph hidden away like evidence of a crime I didn't yet understand. Thomas Brennan's message on my phone unanswered, and now David appearing at my workplace with promises of revelation. "Tell him I'll give him 5 minutes in the cafe downstairs. Public space only." I took my time gathering my things, checking my appearance in the bathroom mirror, making David wait, the way he'd made me wait countless times when he needed money. When I finally descended to the ground floor cafe, I found him at a corner table, and the sight of him almost made me turn around. He looked terrible. Unshaven hair, unwashed, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt I recognized from years ago. The Louis Vuitton luggage and European tan were nowhere in evidence. He looked like what he was, someone who'd finally run out of other people's money. I sat down across from him without greeting, set my phone on the table with the timer visible, and said, "You have 5 minutes. Talk." The power dynamic that had governed our entire relationship had completely inverted. I could see it in the way he hunched forward, in the tremor in his hands, in how his eyes couldn't quite meet mine. David had spent 33 years as the favorite, the one who mattered, the son whose mediocrity was celebrated while my achievements were dismissed. Now he was the one begging for my time. "I know you hate me," he started, his voice rough. "I know I don't deserve even these 5 minutes. But there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you years ago." 4 minutes, 30 seconds. He flinched. "I've known since I was 28 that you're not Dad's biological daughter." The words hung between us. I kept my face carefully neutral, though my pulse quickened. The letters in the wooden box, Thomas Brennan's name on yellowed paper, my mother's handwriting, the life I should have had. I found documents. David continued, words tumbling out faster now. I was looking for Mom's tax returns because I needed to forge her signature on something, and I found this box hidden in her closet. Letters from some guy named Thomas. A birth certificate, the original one with his name where Dad's should be, it was all there. The whole story. And you never told me. No. His voice cracked. I kept it secret because I realized I could use it. I tilted my head slightly, waiting. Whenever Mom and Dad got tired of my shit, and they did Rachel more than you know whenever they started talking about cutting me off or making me get a real job or kicking me out, I'd say something. Nothing direct, just little comments. At least I'm really family. Or, blood matters, doesn't it? Or I'd bring up how you were always trying so hard to fit in. And it worked every time. My hands were flat on the table, perfectly still. Worked how? They'd get angry. Not at me, at you. All that resentment they felt about Mom's past, about raising another man's kid, about the lie they'd been living, I'd redirect it all toward you. And suddenly my failures didn't seem so bad compared to the fundamental problem of your existence. You became the lightning rod that kept me safe. 4 minutes had passed. I didn't stop the timer. Every time they wanted to cut me off, I'd make sure they remembered you weren't really family. I'd ask why they were being so hard on their real son when they'd spent so much on you. I'd remind them how much money you had, how you should be supporting them since they'd raised you out of the goodness of their hearts. I weaponized your paternity, Rachel. For 9 years, I used it as a shield. The cafe noise continued around us. Espresso machines, hissing conversations, murmuring the normal sounds of people living normal lives. I sat in the middle of it all and felt absolutely nothing. You could have told me, I said finally. You could have given me the truth. Let me make my own choices with full information. I know. You could have defended me, could have said something, anything when they treated me like garbage, could have been a brother instead of a parasite feeding off my pain. I know. But that would have meant taking responsibility for yourself, facing consequences, being an adult. And it was so much easier to let me be the target. David's face crumpled. Tears ran down his unshaven cheeks. I'm so sorry. I was weak. I was selfish. I was a coward. I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to know the truth. You deserved to know why they hated you so much. It was never about you, Rachel. It was always about Mom and him and the secret they'd been keeping. I stood up, gathered my phone and bag. The timer showed 6 minutes, but I'd heard everything I needed to hear. You're not weak, David. I said, my voice quiet and perfectly controlled. Weak people make mistakes in the moment. They act without thinking. What you did was calculated, strategic. You saw an opportunity to save yourself at my expense, and you took it deliberately, repeatedly for 9 years. That's not weakness. That's something much worse. Rachel, please. You're calculating. You're a predator who found a convenient victim and exploited her for nearly a decade. And the only reason you're telling me now is because you've run out of options. You're not confessing because you grew a conscience. You're confessing because you think this information has value, that maybe I'll pay for truth the way I paid for everything else. I turned to leave and his voice called after me, desperate. There's more about Thomas Brennan, about why Mom died. Things you need to know. I paused, my back still to him. Email me anything you think is relevant. Don't contact me again after that. I walked away, leaving him crying at that table, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction in his tears, no anger at his confession, no grief for the brother I'd never really had. Just a deep, settled certainty that cutting them all off had been the right choice. But David wasn't done. He had one more secret to trade. David's email arrived that evening. The subject line read, "Everything I know about Thomas Brennan and Mom." I stared at it for 10 minutes before deleting it unread. Whatever David knew, I'd find out on my own terms, not his. Thomas Brennan's text message was still there unanswered. I'd read it dozens of times in the 3 days since receiving it, my thumb hovering over the reply button before pulling back. But after David's confession, after learning that my paternity had been known and weaponized for 9 years, I needed answers from someone who wasn't trying to manipulate me. I typed, "Coffee tomorrow. Public place. I choose the location." His response came within minutes. "Of course. Whatever makes you comfortable, I'll be there." I chose a restaurant downtown, the kind with floor-to-ceiling windows and no private corners. I arrived 30 minutes early, took a table with a clear view of the entrance, and positioned myself with my back to the wall. Old habits from years of feeling unsafe in my own family translated easily into physical security measures. Thomas Brennan walked through the door at exactly 11 o'clock. I recognized him immediately, though I'd never seen him before. He was the man from the photograph, 38 years older but unmistakably the same. The kind eyes, the straight posture, the way he carried himself with quiet confidence rather than bravado. He was early 60s, dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt that suggested professional success without ostentation. His hair was silver at the temples, and when he spotted me, his face transformed with an expression I'd seen in the photograph, genuine warmth. He approached the table but didn't sit until I gestured to the chair across from me. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. His voice was gentle, measured. "I know this must be confusing. Your name was in letters I found in my mother's closet," I said without preamble. "Letters dating back almost 40 years. I also found emails you sent her that she apparently never answered. So you're not a complete stranger, but you're also not someone I understand yet." He nodded slowly. "Your mother and I were very close before she married your father. We were planning a future together, actually. We'd talked about marriage, about moving to the Pacific Northwest where I'd been offered a job. We had names picked out for children we wanted to have." The words landed with surprising force. My mother had wanted children with this man, had wanted a different life entirely. What happened? "Her family happened," Thomas said, and I heard decades of grief compressed into those 3 words. "Your grandparents, your father's parents technically were wealthy, socially prominent people. They'd chosen your father for your mother had arranged everything before she and I even met. When they found out about us, about our plans, they made it very clear that if she chose me, she'd lose everything. Her family, her inheritance, her place in the only world she'd ever known. She chose them." "She was 22 years old and terrified," Thomas said gently. "They told her I was using her, that I was after her family's money, that I'd ruin her life. They showed her fabricated evidence of debts I didn't have, relationships I'd never had. They were very thorough in their character assassination. And when manipulation didn't work, they threatened. If she didn't marry your father, they'd make sure I lost my job, my reputation, everything I'd worked for." He pulled out his phone, scrolled through photos, and turned it to show me. The image was the same photograph I'd found in the wooden box, Thomas and my mother, young and radiantly happy, standing beside a lake with mountains in the background. "Mount Hood," he said. "We drove up there the weekend before her family found out about us. It was the happiest I'd ever been. I think she was happy too." I looked at my mother's face in the photograph, at the joy that was so complete it seemed to radiate from the screen. I'd never seen her look that way in person, not once in my entire life. "After she married your father, I tried everything to stay in contact," Thomas continued. "Letters, phone calls, emails, when that technology existed. I just wanted to know she was okay, that she was happy, that the choice had been worth it. But the family intercepted everything. Your father, your grandparents, they made sure nothing got through." "The emails I found were printed out," I said. "Someone received them but kept them from her. Probably your father. Keeping evidence maybe, or just wanting to know if I was still trying to reach her. Eventually they took a more permanent approach. They told your mother I'd died in a car accident, showed her a fake obituary they'd created, made her believe that even if she'd chosen differently, it wouldn't have mattered because I was gone." "How do you know they told her that?" "Because when I finally found her again 2 years before she died, those were the first words she said to me. 'You're alive. They told me you were dead.' She'd believed it for decades, Rachel. She'd mourned me while I was less than 50 miles away, living and searching for her." The restaurant noise faded to background static. You found her 2 years before she died. I did. We had 6 months of secret meetings, careful conversations, planning her escape. She wanted to leave your father, wanted to finally live the life we'd planned. And then the family found out. They made sure we couldn't contact each other again. 6 months later, she was dead. The implication hung heavy between us. You think they... I think your mother died of a broken heart, Thomas said carefully. I think she died believing she'd lost her last chance at happiness. I think the stress and isolation and despair killed her as surely as any weapon. And I think the family knew exactly what they were doing. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes holding mine. When I saw the news about what happened with your family, about the house and everything, I knew it was you. Your mother showed me pictures, told me stories. I've been searching for you since she died, but you'd made yourself hard to find. The viral video gave me a way to reach you. You needed to be strong enough to stand up to them first. Now you are. Why does it matter now? I asked, though I already knew. Why does any of this matter when she's gone? Because there's something you need to know, Thomas said. Something your mother made me promise to tell you when the time was right. But not yet. You're not ready. Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. It was cream-colored, aged to the color of old piano keys, sealed with wax that had cracked but not broken. My mother's handwriting across the front, for Rachel, when she's ready. She gave this to me 3 days before she died, Thomas said, placing it carefully on the table between us. She'd been feeling worse, knew something was wrong, even though the doctors kept saying it was just stress. She made me promise I'd only give this to you when you were ready to know the truth, when you'd broken free from them. My hands trembled as I picked up the envelope. The wax seal bore an impression I didn't recognize a bird in flight. I slid my finger under the flap, felt the old adhesive give way, and pulled out several sheets of paper covered in my mother's handwriting. The script was shakier than I remembered, but unmistakably hers. My dearest Rachel, it began, and I had to press my hand against my mouth to keep the sound in. She'd never called me that. Not once in my memory had my mother used an endearment with me. Thomas stood quietly. I'll give you privacy. Take all the time you need. I nodded, unable to speak, and he moved to a table across the restaurant, far enough to give me space, but close enough that I could see him if I needed him. I read, My dearest Rachel, if you're reading this, you've finally escaped. I'm so proud of you. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you while I lived, but I tried to protect you for after. I tried to leave you truth when I couldn't give you freedom. The words blurred. I blinked, forcing my eyes to focus, and kept reading. My mother wrote about her marriage, about being 22, and terrified about choosing security over love because she'd been convinced there was no other choice. She wrote about the years that followed, about realizing too late that the price of security was her soul. She wrote about my father's resentment, about how he'd never forgiven her for the choice she'd been forced to make, about how that resentment poisoned everything. He punished me every day for not loving him the way I loved Thomas. And when you were born, the punishment extended to you. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you from that. But it was the next section that made my hands go cold. There's something they did to you that you don't know about, something I only discovered after your grandmother died. The $890,000 house was never something you bought as an obligation to family. Your grandmother left you that exact amount in her will, specifically designated for Rachel Curtis alone, not to be shared with her father's family. I saw the will myself. The language was explicit. I stopped reading. The restaurant sounds, clattering dishes, murmured conversations became white noise. The house I'd bought, believing it was my duty, my contribution to family unity, my chance to finally belong. My mother's words continued. But they lied to you. They manipulated you into believing that buying a family home was what your grandmother wanted, what you owed us, what would finally make you part of the family. They played on your desperate need for belonging, twisted your grandmother's gift into an obligation. They made you think it was your idea, your generous gift to them. But the money was always meant solely for your future, your freedom. Your grandmother knew what kind of people they were. She was trying to give you an escape route, and they stole that from you through psychological manipulation. The words on the page doubled, tripled. I couldn't breathe properly. Everything I'd believed about that house, about that purchase, about my grandmother's wishes, all of it was a lie. They'd taken her gift of freedom and turned it into chains. Don't let them keep it, my mother had written. Take back what was always yours. Use it the way your grandmother intended to build a life free from them. I'd done that. I'd sold the house, taken back what was mine, but I'd done it without knowing I was fulfilling my grandmother's actual wishes, without understanding that she'd tried to save me decades ago. The final section of the letter was shorter, the handwriting even shakier, as if my mother had been running out of strength. There's something else you need to know, something I can't write plainly because I'm afraid of who might find this letter. There was a man I loved before your father, a good man. If you ever meet him, and I hope you do hope he finds you after I'm gone, you'll understand everything about why your father hates you. It's not your fault, sweetheart. You were born from love, not duty. That's why they resent you. You're a living reminder of the life I should have had, the choice I should have made, the love I lost. Born from love, not duty. I read the sentence 3 times, 4 times, trying to make the words mean something other than what they obviously meant. My mother had been married when I was born. I'd seen my birth certificate, the amended one, apparently with my father's name on it. But she wrote, born from love, as if love and my father were mutually exclusive concepts. The letter ended simply, I love you, Rachel. I always have. I'm sorry I couldn't show it better. Be free. Be happy. Be everything I couldn't be. Love, Mom. I sat with the pages in my hands, tears falling silently onto the paper, blurring some of the ink. Thomas appeared beside the table, and I looked up at him with a question I couldn't quite form. The man she loved, I whispered. The good man. She never says his name. Thomas sat down slowly. His eyes were wet, too. I know. But who was he? I asked, though something in me already knew, already understood the shape of the truth, even if I couldn't see its full form yet. And why did it matter now? I left that restaurant with my mother's letter pressed against my chest like a talisman. Thomas had answered what questions he could, but the biggest one, the one my mother had hinted at but never stated plainly, hung between us unspoken. Neither of us was ready to name it yet. Within 2 weeks, I'd relocated permanently to Portland. Not running away, I was done running, but moving towards something new. I found a penthouse in the Pearl District, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows, purchased through my business LLC, so there was no paper trail connecting Rachel Curtis the person to Rachel Curtis the property owner. New phone number, new routines, new everything. The freedom was disorienting at first. I'd wake up in the morning and reach for my phone, fingers already tensing for the barrage of texts and missed calls that had defined my mornings for years. David needing rent money, my mother with another crisis, my father with another demand. But the phone stayed silent. No one knew this number. No one knew where I lived. No one could find me unless I wanted to be found. The first time I went grocery shopping without calculating whether I could afford it after sending my monthly payment to my parents, I stood in the produce section and cried. Just stood there with a bunch of organic kale in my hand, tears running down my face while other shoppers gave me concerned looks and wide berth. The knot of anxiety that had lived in my chest for decades began to loosen one tight coil at a time. I started sleeping through the night, started eating meals without my stomach cramping, started existing in my own space without the constant background fear that someone would need something from me I couldn't afford to give. But the freedom also came with a question: what now I'd spent my entire adult life defined by what I gave others. Take that away, and who was I? Thomas helped me find the answer. We'd been meeting for coffee every few days, his steady presence becoming something I looked forward to rather than dreaded. He never pushed, never demanded, just offered quiet support while I processed everything my mother's letter had revealed. It was Thomas who suggested I might want to use my experience to help others. "Your mother always wanted to help women who felt trapped," he said one afternoon as we walked along the waterfront. "She talked about it during those 6 months we had together. Said if she ever got free, she'd dedicate herself to making sure other women didn't make her mistakes." The idea took root slowly, then grew with surprising speed. Within a month, I'd established Second Chapter Women, a consulting firm specifically designed to help women aged 35 to 65 rebuild their careers and lives after leaving toxic relationships or family situations. The name felt right. My mother never got her second chapter, but I could help others write theirs. I didn't advertise my personal story directly, but I shared it anonymously on the company website. The response was overwhelming. Women from across the country reached out, each with her own version of my nightmare. Financial abuse from partners, exploitation by adult children, family systems designed to extract resources while providing no emotional support. My first client was Margaret, a 52-year-old teacher whose 3 adult sons had been living in her house for a combined 15 years, contributing nothing while she worked 2 jobs to support them. She'd finally asked them to leave, and they'd called her selfish, cruel, a bad mother. She came to my office shaking, convinced she'd done something unforgivable. I saw my mother in her eyes. That same exhausted defeat, that same desperate hope that maybe someone would tell her it was okay to choose herself. "You're not selfish," I told her. "You're surviving, and survival isn't something you need to apologize for." We worked together for 3 months. I helped her set boundaries, change her locks, redirect her finances into accounts they couldn't access. I connected her with a therapist who specialized in family estrangement. I sat with her while she practiced saying no without apologizing. The day she called to tell me her sons had finally gotten jobs and moved out, that she was sleeping peacefully for the first time in years, I understood what purpose felt like. This wasn't just a business, it was healing mine and theirs. Thomas became part of the work too, though unofficially. He'd review my business plans, offer strategic advice, connect me with potential clients through his network. But more than that, he filled in the gaps of my mother's story, painting a picture of a woman I'd never really known. "She loved poetry," he told me one evening over dinner at my apartment. "Especially Mary Oliver. She used to carry a worn copy of Wild Geese in her purse." I never knew that. I'd cleaned out my mother's belongings after she died. I'd never found a poetry book. "She probably hid it. Your father mocked anything he considered frivolous." Thomas's voice carried old anger. "She wanted to travel to Ireland, see the cliffs of Moher. She dreamed about opening a small bookstore with a coffee shop attached, the kind of place where people could spend hours reading without pressure to buy." Each detail felt like recovering a piece of stolen treasure. My mother had been a whole person with dreams and desires beyond the exhausted, diminished woman I'd known. Family obligation hadn't just limited her, it had erased her. I noticed things about Thomas, too. He'd never married, had no children. His apartment, which I'd visited once, was comfortable but impersonal, like he'd been waiting for a life that never started. The way he talked about my mother wasn't past tense nostalgia, it was present tense grief, as fresh as if she'd died yesterday instead of 3 years ago. "Why didn't you ever move on?" I asked him once. "Find someone else?" "Because, he said simply, "she was it for me. There was never going to be anyone else." The intimacy of his knowledge about my mother, the devotion that hadn't dimmed in nearly 4 decades, the way his face transformed when he talked about her, it all pointed toward a truth I wasn't quite ready to examine directly. For 2 months, I built my new life. Second chapter. Women grew. I helped 6 women escape toxic situations. I started actually enjoying my penthouse instead of just existing in it. I learned what it felt like to live without fear, but my family wasn't finished with me yet. The first new segment appeared 2 months after I'd sold the house. I was in my office at Second Chapter Women working with a client when my phone started buzzing with messages. Thomas had sent a link with just 3 words, "You need to see this." I waited until my client left before clicking the video. The local news channel had done a human interest piece, "Elderly Parents Left Homeless by Successful Daughter." There they were sitting on a worn couch in what I recognized as a rental apartment, looking appropriately devastated. My mother spoke directly to the camera, her voice trembling. She changed after she became successful. The money changed her. She became greedy cold. We tried to reach out, tried to understand, but she shut us out completely. My father, looking older and frailer than I remembered, added, "While we were dealing with family matters grieving, she sold our home out from under us. We came back to nothing. Our own daughter did this." The story they told was carefully crafted fiction. No mention of the European vacation I'd funded. No mention of the decades of financial exploitation. No mention of calling me a leech while planning their next scam. Just two elderly people abandoned by their cruel daughter facing homelessness in their golden years. The comments section was split. Many people recognized the manipulation, referenced the viral video, called my family out for the obvious lies. But others bought the narrative completely. Family is family no matter what. How could she abandon her elderly parents? Money ruins people. Within a week, they'd started a GoFundMe. Help Elderly Parents Betrayed by Daughter had raised $15,000 before I even learned it existed. The description painted them as destitute, homeless, struggling to survive after their daughter's betrayal. The truth that they were living in a decent rental apartment funded by savings they'd accumulated from years of exploiting me was carefully omitted. I sat in my apartment reading the comments on their fundraising page, each one a small cut. People calling me heartless, demanding I be ashamed, hoping karma would catch up to me. They didn't know the full story, but their judgment felt heavy anyway. Then came the legal papers. A process server found me at my office 3 weeks after the news segment aired. The lawsuit was 30 pages long, filed by Miller & Associates, a law firm I later learned specialized in aggressive, ethically questionable tactics. The charges were breathtaking in their audacity: financial exploitation, claiming I had manipulated and stolen from my elderly parents; defamation over the viral recording that had exposed their true nature; fraud alleging I'd tricked them into leaving before selling the house; and a demand for repayment of what they claimed were loans totaling over $200,000. Every dollar I'd given them over the years presented now as loans I'd defaulted on. Their attorney, Marcus Miller, gave an interview the day after filing. I watched him on the evening news, smooth and confident, painting me as a vindictive daughter who'd weaponized her financial success against her loving family. "This is elder abuse," he said gravely, "and we intend to hold Ms. Curtis accountable." The headlines multiplied. Daughter sued by parents she allegedly exploited. Family fights back against viral video daughter. My email inbox filled with messages from strangers. Some supportive, but many vicious. People who knew nothing about my life, nothing about what I'd endured, telling me I was going to hell. The stress was crushing. I'd built this new life, this peaceful existence, and now they were invading it with lawyers and lies and public judgment. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work, found myself constantly checking my phone for the next attack. Thomas found me in my office at 2 a.m, 4 days after I'd been served, staring at my laptop screen, reading through the lawsuit for the 100th time. "You gave me emergency access to the building," he said gently, setting down a bag from the coffee shop that stayed open late. "I used it. You haven't answered your phone in 6 hours. "They're going to drag this out," I said, my voice hollow. "Make it as public and painful as possible. Even if they lose, they'll have succeeded in making me miserable." "They're desperate," Thomas said, sitting across from my desk. "Desperate people make mistakes. And your family has been making mistakes for decades. They just never had consequences before." He pulled out his own phone, made a call right there in my office, despite the late hour. "Jennifer, it's Thomas Brennan. I need a referral. Family law abuse cases, someone who fights and wins." He listened for a moment, then nodded. "Perfect. Can you make the introduction tomorrow?" Another pause. "She's being sued by people who abused her for decades." "Yes." Exactly that kind of case. By the next afternoon, I was sitting in the downtown office of Patricia Winter's senior partner at Winters & Chen, a firm that specialized in protecting abuse survivors from their abusers. She was 60-something, sharp-eyed, and had a reputation for destroying opposing counsel in court. She read through the lawsuit while I sat in silence. When she finished, she set it aside and looked at me directly. "This is a nuisance suit. Weak allegations, no supporting evidence filed by a lawyer who's been sanctioned twice for ethical violations. They're hoping you'll settle just to make it go away." She leaned forward. "But here's what they don't understand. You have documentation. The recording of them calling you names and planning to exploit you further. Financial records showing years of one-way transfers. Witness statements if we need them. You have an airtight defense." "So we just defend?" I asked. "We could do that," Patricia said. "Or we could counterclaim. Sue them for the financial abuse, the defamation from their false GoFundMe, and news appearances, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Turn this from their lawsuit into your lawsuit. Make them defend their behavior in open court where all their dirty laundry becomes public record." I thought about my mother's letter, about Thomas's decades of searching for her, about Margaret and the other women I'd helped through Second Chapter Women, all of them recovering from family members who'd treated them as resources to exploit rather than people to love. "I want to fight," I said. Patricia smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who knew how to win and enjoyed doing it. "Good, because I have a feeling they forgot something important when they filed this lawsuit." I nodded slowly. "They forgot that I recorded everything." "The original call," Patricia said. "The one where they called you a leech and planned their next scam. That recording alone destroys their entire case. And if we go on offense, it becomes Exhibit A in proving systematic abuse." I pulled out my phone, opened the files I'd backed up to 3 different cloud services, and showed her the recording. She listened to the whole thing, her expression growing harder with each cruel word. When it finished, she looked at me with something like admiration. They have no idea what's about to hit them. But I had something they forgot: the original call recording. Patricia worked fast. Within 48 hours, we'd established a simple website with 1 page. At the top, the truth about the Curtis family lawsuit. Below that, the complete audio recording of the phone call, timestamped and verified by a digital forensics expert Patricia knew. We didn't editorialize, didn't add commentary or explanation. Just the raw audio with 1 line of context. This conversation occurred 1 week before the family's European vacation, which Rachel Curtis funded with $20,000. They believed the call had ended. It hadn't. I uploaded it at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. By noon, it had 50,000 plays. By dinner, 500,000. By the time I went to bed that night, the number had passed 2 million. My father's voice, casual and cruel. "She's nothing but a leech." My mother's mocking laughter. "She's so desperate for our attention." David's contemptuous addition. "She actually thinks buying us things makes her family." And then the planning. The calculated discussion of their next fabricated emergency, how to extract another 20,000, how to rotate the crises so I wouldn't catch on. All of it captured in their own voices, undeniable and damning. But it was one line that seemed to capture the internet's attention most. My father's voice heavy with decades of resentment. "If only she weren't mine to begin with." News outlets picked it up immediately. CNN ran a segment on family financial abuse using my recording as a case study. A panel of psychologists discussed the implications of that one phrase, "if only she weren't mine," analyzing the particular cruelty of a parent wishing away their child's existence. The phrase became shorthand, a reference point for parental rejection. People started using it in comments, in tweets, and discussions about toxic families. Within 24 hours, the narrative had completely flipped. The GoFundMe was reported by hundreds of people and shut down for fraud. The platform issued a statement about vigilance against exploitation and refunded all donations. My family's carefully constructed victimhood collapsed in a single day. The local news station that had run the original puff piece issued a correction and apology. We failed to adequately fact-check the Curtis family's claims before airing their story. We apologize to our viewers and to Rachel Curtis for our role in spreading false information. Then came the witnesses. Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who'd filmed the original video, gave an interview describing years of watching my family treat me poorly during my rare visits. They'd make her wait outside while they got ready sometimes for 20 minutes in the heat. She always brought gifts. They never said thank you where I could hear. A former colleague of my mother's contacted Patricia's office with information that made my stomach turn. She described how my father had systematically isolated my mother in her final years, monitoring her phone calls, reading her emails, cutting off her friendships. Sarah tried to tell me something was wrong, but every time we planned to meet, he'd suddenly have an emergency that required her presence. David's former employer spoke anonymously about how David had bragged about manipulating me. He'd joke about it during lunch breaks, called it the Rachel Bank, said his sister was so desperate for family approval she'd pay anything. The evidence mounted like snow in an avalanche. Each revelation buried my family deeper under the weight of their own cruelty. #Justice. For Rachel trended nationally for 3 days. My story became a rallying point for adult children breaking free from toxic families, for daughters tired of being treated as resources, for anyone who'd ever been called ungrateful for setting boundaries. Marcus Miller, the aggressive attorney who'd filed the lawsuit with such confidence, withdrew from the case, citing irreconcilable differences. Legal code for discovering his clients had lied to him about everything. Without representation and facing Patricia's promised counterclaim, my family's lawsuit quietly died. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt vindicated. And part of me did, but another part of me couldn't stop thinking about that one phrase. If only she weren't mine to begin with. Everyone else heard it as a cruel parent wishing they'd never had a child. But I kept replaying the exact wording, the specific grammar of rejection. Not if only I never had her. Not if only she'd never been born. But if only she weren't mine. The possessive, the attribution. As if I belonged to someone else but had been incorrectly assigned to him. I sat in my apartment 3 nights after the recording went viral, surrounded by evidence of victory news articles praising my courage, messages from thousands of people sharing their own stories. Patricia's assurance that we could pursue damages if I wanted, and all I could think about was that phrase. My mother's letter had said, "You were born from love, not duty. That's why they resent you. You're a living reminder of the life I should have had." David had confessed, "I've known since I was 28 that you're not Dad's biological daughter." Thomas had appeared in my life claiming to have loved my mother, claiming to have planned a future with her, claiming to have never stopped searching for her. And my father had said, "If only she weren't mine to begin with." The pieces were all there. I'd been avoiding assembling them into the picture they obviously formed because once I saw it clearly, everything would change. But I couldn't hide from it anymore. I needed to know. The next morning I drove to the county records office and requested my birth certificate. Not the standard copy they issue to anyone who asks, but the original filing. The first document entered into the system when I was born. The clerk processed my request with bureaucratic efficiency. "We have 2 certificates on file for you," she said, frowning at her screen. An original and an amended version filed 6 months later. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. "I need to see both." She printed them out, handed them across the counter, and I looked down at the original birth certificate filed 37 years ago in this very office. Under Father, in the space where I'd always seen my father's name on the amended version I'd used for passports and driver's licenses, was a different name entirely. The name on my birth certificate wasn't his. The clerk at the county records office was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She processed my request with practiced efficiency, typing into her system, while I stood at the counter trying to keep my hands from shaking. "Standard birth certificate for Rachel Marie Curtis," she said, hitting print. The machine whirred to life behind her. That'll be $15. Wait, I said before she could hand me the document. I need all versions on file. Every certificate associated with my name. She looked up, glasses sliding down her nose. Every version. Yes, the original filing and any amendments. Everything in the system. She studied me for a moment, perhaps recognizing something in my face, the desperation or determination or fear. Whatever she saw made her turn back to her computer without argument. Let me check. More typing. Her eyebrows raised slightly. Oh, there are 2 certificates on file. An original and an amended version filed 6 months after birth. That's not uncommon. Usually happens after marriages, adoptions, or paternity corrections. Paternity corrections. I need both, I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant and hollow. She printed the second document. The sound of the printer seemed impossibly loud in the quiet office. Other people were moving around me, someone requesting a death certificate, someone else asking about property records, but I couldn't focus on anything except the papers materializing behind that counter. The clerk handed them both to me. Both documents are legally valid. The amended version is what's typically used for official purposes, but the original remains part of the permanent record. I looked down at the papers in my hands. The top one was familiar, the birth certificate I'd used my entire life. Mother Sarah Elizabeth Curtis. Father Robert James Curtis. Born Rachel Marie Curtis. Date, time, hospital. All the information I'd memorized from applying for passports and driver's licenses. But the second document, yellowed slightly with age, had different information in one crucial space. Under father, in careful handwriting that looked like it belonged to a hospital nurse from decades ago, was typed Thomas Brennan. The office sounds faded to white noise. I stared at those 2 words until they blurred, then refocused, then blurred again. I'd known. On some level, I'd known since Thomas first appeared in my life, since I'd read my mother's letter, since I'd heard my father say, "If only she weren't mine to begin with." But knowing and seeing are different things. This was official. Black ink on government paper. Filed within 24 hours of my birth. Thomas Brennan was my biological father. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The clerk's voice came from far away. I nodded without looking up, pulled out my phone with trembling hands, and photographed both certificates. Then I walked out of the building on legs that didn't quite feel like mine. My car was parked 3 blocks away. I don't remember walking to it. I sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the steering wheel, unable to make myself turn the key. The birth certificates lay on the passenger seat beside me, 2 versions of the same life, 2 different fathers, 2 completely different truths. I called Thomas. He answered on the second ring. "Rachel." I saw it. My voice cracked. "I went to the county records office. I saw the original birth certificate. Your name is on it. Thomas Brennan, father." The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard him breathe out a sound like he'd been holding it for years. "I've been waiting 9 months for you to find out," he said finally, and his voice was thick with emotion I'd never heard from him before. "Since the day I first contacted you. I wanted to tell you so many times. Every time we met for coffee, every time we talked about your mother, every conversation we had about second chapter women. I wanted to just say it. Why didn't you?" "Because your mother made me promise." He was crying now, I could hear it. "She made me swear that if I ever found you, I would let you discover it yourself. She believed you needed to be strong enough first. That if you learned the truth while you were still under their control, still desperate for their approval, it would destroy you rather than free you." I thought about who I'd been a year ago. The woman who would have done anything for scraps of affection from people who despised her. The woman who measured her worth by how much she could give away. My mother had been right. That version of me couldn't have handled this truth. "Why didn't he tell me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The man who raised me. Robert. Why didn't he just tell me I wasn't his? Because it gave him power, Thomas said quietly. Over you. Over your mother. As long as the secret remained hidden, he could punish you both for it without ever having to name what he was punishing you for. He could make your mother watch you suffer, knowing it was because of her choice, because of us. And he could make you feel inadequate without you ever understanding why nothing you did was enough. The pieces fell into place with the terrible clarity of truth that's been there all along, just waiting to be seen. The man who raised me hadn't been a bad father. He'd been a man systematically destroying the physical evidence of his wife's love for someone else. I wasn't his daughter. I was his wife's betrayal made flesh, walking around his house, eating his food, carrying another man's genes while bearing his name. Every achievement I'd ever earned wasn't dismissed because I'd failed. It was dismissed because succeeding only made my existence more undeniable. Every time I tried to earn his love, I was actually reminding him that I existed at all. I wasn't inadequate. I was collateral damage in a decades-long revenge against my mother. The relief and rage hit simultaneously, warring for space in my chest. Relief because it was never my fault. Rage because my mother had suffered for it, had watched me suffer for it, had died with this secret still strangling her. Thomas, I said, and the word felt different now, weighted with new meaning. If you knew all this, if you and Mom reconnected 2 years before she died, if you were planning her escape, why did she die alone? Why didn't you save her? The silence that followed was the worst yet. But if he knew all along, I whispered into the phone, the question forming even as I asked it. Why did my mother die alone? Thomas and I met at Patricia's office the next morning. I'd barely slept, spent the night alternating between staring at the birth certificates and researching medical records requests. Patricia had already started the process, using her legal standing to expedite what would normally take weeks. Medical records can tell us a lot about what someone was experiencing, Patricia said, her fingers steepled on her desk. Especially if doctors documented concerns about the home environment. And given what you've told me about your mother's death at 58, I think we need to see the complete picture. The records arrived by secure courier 3 days later. Patricia, Thomas, and I sat in her conference room while she went through them page by page, her expression growing darker with each sheet. My mother had been to the emergency room 7 times in the 2 years before her death. Not for heart problems, though, that's ultimately what killed her. For panic attacks. Severe anxiety. Stress-induced migraines that left her unable to see. Each visit included notes about elevated blood pressure, rapid heartbeat symptoms that doctors kept attributing to psychological distress rather than physical disease. But it was the notation from Dr. Ellen Zhao, my mother's primary care physician, that made my hands shake. The note was dated 3 months before my mother's death. Patient exhibits severe psychological distress from family environment. Blood pressure dangerously elevated despite medication. Recommended immediate separation from toxic household for health reasons. Patient declined, stating she had nowhere to go and couldn't leave. Family refused to participate in counseling or acknowledge role in patient's deteriorating condition. Strongly advised patient to seek support from domestic violence resources, as psychological abuse can be as damaging as physical. Patient became tearful and refused further discussion. Dr. Zhao had seen it, had documented it, had tried to intervene, and my mother had felt so trapped she couldn't even accept help when it was offered. Your mother's doctor essentially wrote that the family environment was killing her, Patricia said quietly. And they refused to change anything. This is damning evidence of long-term abuse. I looked at Thomas. His face was gray, aged by grief. Tell me what happened when you found her. Tell me everything. He took a long breath, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of years of guilt. I'd been searching for her since the day she married. 35 years of searching Rachel. Private investigators, public records, mutual friends who'd lost touch. I never stopped looking. How did you finally find her? LinkedIn of all things. A bitter smile. She'd created a profile for her bookkeeping work, used her maiden name as a middle initial, probably hoping I'd see it. I sent her a message. She responded within an hour. We met 3 days later at a coffee shop 2 towns over, somewhere your father wouldn't see us. Thomas stood, walked to the window, kept his back to us as he continued. She was unrecognizable, Rachel. The woman I'd loved was vibrant, full of laughter and dreams. The woman I met that day was a shadow. Thin, anxious, defeated. She cried when she saw me. Just stood there in the coffee shop parking lot and sobbed like something broken. What did she tell you? That she'd made a terrible mistake. That she'd been wrong to choose security over love. That every day of her marriage had been punishment for that choice. His voice cracked. She said your father reminded her constantly that she'd settled for him, that she'd never loved him the way she loved me. He used it as a weapon, Rachel. Made her feel guilty for a feeling she couldn't control. I thought about my mother's quiet sadness, the way she'd moved through our house like a ghost. I'd always attributed it to her personality, to some internal melancholy. I'd never considered it might be learned, might be the result of decades of systematic destruction. We started planning her escape, Thomas continued. It took time. She needed to gather documents, open a bank account your father didn't know about, plan where she'd go. We were being careful, but not careful enough. They found out. Your father found a receipt for one of our coffee meetings in her car. She'd been so careful, but she'd kept one receipt, one small piece of evidence that our meetings were real. He confronted her. She admitted everything that she'd found me, that we'd been meeting, that she was planning to leave. Thomas turned back to face us, and I'd never seen anyone look so haunted. Instead of rage or violence or any normal reaction, your father was methodical. He told her calmly that if she tried to leave, if she tried to contact me again, he'd make sure you were cut off completely. That you'd never know why you'd just suddenly be excluded from everything. He knew that threat would work because he knew your mother would sacrifice herself for you. But that's not all he did, I said, already knowing. No. Thomas's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. 2 weeks later, your mother received a phone call. Someone claiming to be a police officer telling her I'd died in a car accident. Then a funeral announcement arrived in the mail with my name on it, a fabricated service at a funeral home 3 states away. They'd even created a fake obituary, posted it online, made it look completely real. The cruelty of it took my breath away. She believed it. Why wouldn't she? Your father showed appropriate sympathy, suggested maybe it was for the best that she'd found closure. She had no reason to suspect it was a lie, no way to verify it without revealing she'd been trying to contact me. Thomas's hands clenched into fists. The isolation, Rachel, thinking I'd died, believing she'd lost her only hope of escape. It destroyed something fundamental in her. I looked down at Dr. Zhao's notes again. The dates aligned. My mother's emergency room visits had increased dramatically in the 6 months after she believed Thomas had died. Panic attacks became weekly occurrences. Her blood pressure medications had to be increased twice. The doctor's notes grew more concerned, more urgent. She died of heart failure, I said slowly. But her heart failed because her spirit broke first. Yes, Thomas whispered. Patricia had been silent, taking notes, but now she spoke. In most jurisdictions, emotional abuse isn't criminally actionable unless it crosses into specific categories like stalking or threats. But this documented medical evidence, combined with the pattern of behavior toward you, Rachel, builds a powerful civil case. We can't prove murder, but we can prove long-term psychological abuse that contributed to her death. I stood up, walked to the window where Thomas had been standing, looked out at the Portland skyline. Somewhere in this city I'd been trying to build a new life. But I realized now that new life couldn't fully begin until I'd finished something my mother had started and couldn't complete. This isn't just about me anymore, I said. It's about her. About a woman who was punished for falling in love with the wrong person. About someone who tried to protect her daughter the only way she knew how. About justice for someone who died thinking she'd lost everything. I turned back to Patricia. I want to take them to court. Not just to defend myself from their lawsuit. I want them to answer for what they did to her, what they did to us both. Patricia nodded. Then it's time to finish what your mother couldn't. The call came 2 days after Thomas told me about my mother's death. An unfamiliar number with a local area code. I'd been screening calls religiously, but something made me answer this one. Ms. Curtis. This is Howard Finch from Finch & Associates. I represent the estate of Margaret Curtis, your maternal grandmother. I sat down slowly. My grandmother had died 5 years ago, right before I'd bought the house that caused all of this. The estate was settled years ago. Not entirely, he said, and I heard papers rustling in the background. Your grandmother's will included conditional clauses, specific assets and documents designated for you that could only be released after certain conditions were met. Those conditions have now been satisfied. My heart started pounding. What conditions? The will specified that these materials be released only after you had legally severed all ties with your father's family. Given the recent court filings and your retained counsel, our firm has determined that condition has been met. Can you come to my office this week? I went that afternoon. Howard Finch's office was in a historic building downtown, all dark wood and leather-bound law books that probably cost more than my first car. He was elderly 70s at least, with the careful movements of someone who'd been practicing law since before I was born. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, he said, gesturing for me to sit. Very precise in her wishes, very protective of you specifically. I didn't know her well, I admitted. She died when I was 32. We saw her maybe once a year. She knew more about your situation than you might think. He pulled a large file box from behind his desk and set it in front of me. She began documenting concerns about your family approximately 20 years ago. These are copies of everything she collected. I opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were folders organized by year, each one thick with documents, financial statements, bank records, emails printed and highlighted, handwritten notes in my grandmother's precise script. The first folder I opened was labeled Inheritance Diversion 2008-2010. Inside were bank statements showing large transfers from my mother's accounts I'd never known existed into accounts controlled by my father. 20,000 here, 35,000 there. Transfers marked household expenses or family investments that my mother had apparently authorized, but my grandmother had flagged as suspicious. Your mother inherited a substantial amount when her father died, Howard explained. Nearly $400,000. Your grandmother watched that money disappear over the course of 5 years, all of it redirected by your father into accounts your mother couldn't access. I flipped through more folders. Each one documented another form of theft or manipulation. Medical bills paid from my mother's accounts for procedures my father had not her. Loans to David that were never repaid taken from my mother's funds without her knowledge. Real estate investments in my father's name only purchased with my mother's inheritance. Did my mother know? Your grandmother confronted her about it multiple times. Your mother always defended your father, said he was managing the money for both of them, insisted it was fine. Your grandmother believed your mother was being coerced or manipulated into accepting it. He paused. The documentation stops about 6 months before your mother died. Your grandmother's own health was failing by then. I kept digging through the box until I found an envelope marked, "For Rachel Trust Distribution." Inside was a letter in my grandmother's handwriting and a thick packet of legal documents. I read the letter first. Rachel, you are the only member of that family worth saving. I watched them destroy my beautiful Sarah and I couldn't stop it. She wouldn't listen, wouldn't leave, wouldn't protect herself, even when I begged her to. But I made sure you would have resources when you were finally ready to escape. My vision blurred, but I kept reading. I've established a trust fund in your name, $1.5 million invested conservatively. It's been growing for 5 years waiting for you. The firm managing it will release it to you once you've legally separated from that toxic family. Use this money to live the life your mother never could. Travel. Build something meaningful. Help other women escape what she couldn't. And if you choose to use these resources to ensure they face consequences for what they did, you're stronger than Sarah was. I know you'll survive what broke her. $1.5 million. Money that had been waiting for me, accumulating interest protected from my family's reach by my grandmother's foresight and legal precision. I looked at Howard, unable to speak.
"The trust has been managed by our firm since your grandmother's death," he said gently. "With conservative investments, it's now worth approximately $1.7 million. It's yours, Ms. Curtis. No strings, no conditions beyond the one already met." I sat back in the leather chair, my grandmother's letter still in my hands. She'd known. Somehow she'd known I would eventually break free, and she'd made sure I'd have the resources to not just survive, but thrive. "There's one more thing," Howard said, pulling out another document. "Your grandmother included a specific clause granting you legal standing to pursue civil action on behalf of your mother's estate for the stolen funds. Normally, the statute of limitations would have expired, but because the theft was concealed through fraud, and you only recently discovered it, the clock hasn't started." Patricia had been right. We weren't just defending against my family's lawsuit. We could go on the offensive.
"What does that mean practically?" I asked. "It means you can sue them for every dollar they stole from your mother. With this documentation as evidence, you have an exceptionally strong case. Your attorney can add this to the counterclaim you're already filing." He slid the documents across his desk. "Your grandmother's final gift to you, not just freedom, but justice." I gathered everything, the box of evidence, the trust documents, my grandmother's letter, and carried it all to my car in a daze. That evening, I spread it all out on my dining room table while Thomas and Patricia reviewed every page. "This is extraordinary," Patricia said after an hour of reading. "This isn't just evidence. It's a roadmap to dismantling their entire defense. They can't claim they're victims when we can prove they systematically stole from your mother for 2 decades. Can we win?" I asked. "Win." Patricia looked up and her smile was fierce. "Rachel, with this evidence, we can destroy them." But the will had one final clause, a legal weapon. Patricia worked through the weekend assembling what she called the most comprehensive family abuse case she'd seen in 20 years of practice. We spread everything across her conference room table, like pieces of a puzzle that finally revealed its complete picture. The recorded phone call where they called me a leech and planned their next financial extraction, both birth certificates showing Thomas as my biological father, my mother's medical records documenting that doctors believed the family environment was killing her, my grandmother's meticulous documentation of 20 years of financial theft, bank statements proving they'd stolen over $400,000 from my mother's inheritance, the fake obituary they'd created to make my mother believe Thomas had died. Every piece of evidence told part of the story. Together, they told the whole truth. "We're filing counterclaims on multiple fronts." Patricia explained, her pen moving across legal pads as she outlined our strategy. "Financial exploitation of both you and your mother. Emotional abuse spanning decades. Fraud related to the house purchase and your grandmother's will. Defamation through their GoFundMe and news appearances. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. And we're pursuing recovery of funds stolen from your mother's estate on your behalf as her heir." "Will it work?" Thomas asked. He'd been present for every planning session, his support steady and unwavering. "It's not just strong, it's devastating," Patricia said. "They filed a nuisance lawsuit hoping Rachel would settle to avoid publicity. Instead, they've opened the door for us to bring everything into court. Every ugly truth, every manipulation, every crime they committed will become public record." I looked at the evidence spread before us. My entire life distilled into documents and recordings and medical notes. The proof that I'd never been crazy, never been ungrateful, never been the problem they'd convinced me I was. "When do we file?" I asked. "We could file tomorrow," Patricia said. "But I want to give you another option first." She pulled out a draft letter, slid it across the table to me. We offer them one chance to settle before this goes public. Meet with you, hear what evidence we have, and choose whether to settle quietly or face trial. It's a strategic move, shows good faith to a judge if they refuse. But Rachel, I want you to be clear about something. They don't deserve mercy. You don't owe them this opportunity. Then why offer it? Patricia's smile was sharp. Because I want to see their faces when they realize they've lost. When they understand the daughter they underestimated has them completely outmaneuvered. And because once they refuse, and they will refuse, they're too arrogant not to. We proceed to court with the added evidence that we tried to resolve this reasonably, and they chose warfare. I read the letter. It was formal clinical, offering one face-to-face meeting to discuss settlement options before proceeding to court. It hinted at the evidence we possessed without revealing its full scope. It gave them just enough rope to hang themselves with. Send it, I said. The letter went out Monday morning via certified mail and email. My father called Patricia's office within 2 hours, his voice captured on the office voicemail system. We accept the meeting. Tell Rachel we're willing to talk to work this out like family. We've always been willing to forgive her overreaction. We'll meet whenever she wants. Forgive my overreaction. As if I was a child throwing a tantrum, not a grown woman defending herself from decades of abuse. They think you're weakening, Thomas said when Patricia played him the message. They think this meeting means you're having second thoughts. Good, I said. Let them think that. We scheduled the meeting for the following Thursday at 2 in the afternoon. Patricia's office, her conference room, neutral ground with witnesses. I spent the week preparing, but not the way they'd expect. Not practicing what to say or rehearsing arguments. Instead, I prepared emotionally for the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating since I'd seen my birth certificate. Thomas and I met the night before at my apartment. We'd grown close over these months, closer than I'd ever been with the man who'd raised me. He listened when I talked, offered advice without demanding I take it, showed up without requiring performance or payment. This was what a parent was supposed to be. Are you sure you want me there tomorrow? He asked. This might be easier for you if you don't have to manage their reaction to me. I want you there precisely because of their reaction, I said. I want them to see what they never understood, that I wasn't theirs, that their cruelty was directed at someone who never belonged to them in the first place, that you, my real father, have been here supporting me while they've been trying to destroy me. It's going to be brutal. They made it brutal, I said. I'm just going to show them the truth. Thomas reached across the table, covered my hand with his. Your mother would be so proud of you. She'd be proud of your strength, proud that you escaped when she couldn't, proud that you're fighting back. I'm doing this for her as much as for me. I know, and that's exactly why we're going to win. Thursday arrived with Portland rain, the kind that makes everything gray and cold. I dressed carefully, professional, but not severe, confident, but not aggressive. Patricia had coached me, let the evidence speak. You just need to be present, calm and unshakable. Thomas picked me up at 1 o'clock. We drove to Patricia's office in silence, both of us preparing for what was about to happen. My family would be there, my father, who wasn't my father. My mother's memory, David with his 9 years of weaponized secrets. They thought they were coming to negotiate, to manipulate me one more time into backing down. They had no idea what I was about to show them. Patricia's conference room was all glass and chrome, the kind of space designed to intimidate. 14th floor with views of the city, a table that could seat 12 and recording equipment set up discreetly in the corners. Everything about the space said this is serious. This is real. This is not a family discussion. Thomas and I arrived first. Patricia was already there, documents organized in folders, each one labeled with clinical precision. Financial exploitation, medical evidence, birth records, fraudulent communications, the truth sorted and categorized like evidence at a crime scene. My family arrived 15 minutes late. I watched them through the glass wall as they checked in with the receptionist, and I barely recognized them. 3 months of stress had carved itself into their faces. My father had lost weight, his suit hanging loose on a frame that seemed diminished. My mother's hair had gone grayer, pulled back in a style that looked more like she'd given up than chosen. David looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, wearing clothes that weren't quite clean. But underneath the wear, I could see it, the arrogance, the certainty that they could still control this situation. They walked into the conference room like they were doing me a favor by showing up. They'd brought a lawyer, young, nervous, clearly not the aggressive attorney who'd filed their original lawsuit. Someone cheaper. Someone desperate enough to take a case after Marcus Miller had publicly withdrawn. Patricia stood. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." They arranged themselves on one side of the table. Thomas and I sat on the other, Patricia at the head. The young lawyer, his nameplate read, Jeremy Chen, kept glancing between his clients and the documents stacked in front of Patricia. My father leaned forward, attempting warmth. "Rachel, sweetheart, I'm glad you wanted to meet. We can work this out. Family always works things out." I let the words hang there for a moment. Sweetheart. A word he'd never used when it might have mattered. "Before we discuss anything else," I said, my voice perfectly steady, "I'd like you to meet someone." I gestured to Thomas, who'd been sitting quietly beside me. My family had barely glanced at him, assuming he was another attorney or paralegal. "This is Thomas Brennan," I said, watching their faces carefully. "My biological father." The silence was absolute. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. David's eyes went wide. But it was Robert. I couldn't call him my father anymore, couldn't even think of him that way, whose reaction was most telling. His face didn't just pale. It crumbled, decades of barely controlled rage finally given form, as his worst fear materialized across the table. "That's not..." My mother started, but her voice failed. "It is," I said calmly. I reached into the folder in front of me and pulled out 2 documents. "This is my original birth certificate filed within 24 hours of my birth, Father Thomas Brennan. And this is the amended certificate filed 6 months later after you forced my mother to marry you, Father Robert Curtis." I slid them across the table. My mother's hands trembled as she picked them up. Robert stared at them like they were weapons. "Both are legally valid," Patricia added. "One shows biological truth, the other shows legal fiction." I wasn't done. I pulled out the next document. "This is my grandmother Margaret Curtis's will, the one you never knew existed, the one where she documents 20 years of watching you steal from my mother." Another document. "These are my mother's medical records. Note the date 3 months before her death where her doctor explicitly states the family environment is killing her." Another. "These are bank records showing $400,000 diverted from my mother's inheritance into accounts only you could access, Robert." Another. "These are the emails Thomas sent my mother, emails that were intercepted. And this is the fake obituary you created to make her think Thomas had died." I laid them out one by one like cards in a game they'd already lost. With each document, my family's faces grew more ashen, more trapped. "And finally," I said, pulling out the transcript, "this is the recording of you calling me a leech and planning how to extract more money from me. The recording that millions of people have now heard." The young lawyer was staring at his clients with barely concealed horror. Robert had his head in his hands. My mother was crying silently. David looked like he might be sick. "You called me a leech," I said, and my voice was quiet, but carried the weight of every hurt I'd ever endured. "You used me as an ATM for years. You made my mother's life hell because she loved someone else before you forced her into marriage. You stole from her. You isolated her. You faked a man's death to break her spirit. And worst of all, you made me believe I wasn't good enough, wasn't worthy, wasn't lovable, when the truth is, I was never yours to judge." My voice never rose, never wavered. The clinical precision of my delivery was more devastating than screaming could ever be. Jeremy Chen quietly closed his briefcase and stood up. "I need to consult with my clients privately." "No," I said. "They can consult after they've heard their options. Sit down, Mr. Chen." He sat. I folded my hands on the table. "You have 2 choices. Option 1. You sign agreements admitting to financial exploitation of both me and my mother. You return every dollar stolen from her estate that's $400,000 plus interest. You agree to permanent no-contact orders. In exchange, we keep this settlement private. My mother started to speak, but I continued. Option 2. We proceed to court. Every piece of evidence on this table becomes public record. Every document, every recording, every sick thing you did gets examined by a judge and reported by every media outlet that's already following this story. And trust me, they're very interested in the woman whose family faked a man's death to control her. Robert finally looked up, his eyes red. Rachel, please. I held up my hand. You have 48 hours to decide. After that, we file and you lose the option of privacy. I stood. Thomas stood with me. Patricia gathered the documents, leaving copies on the table for them to review. One more thing, I said at the door. Don't contact me. Don't call. Don't text. Your response goes through Patricia. If you try to reach me directly, we file immediately. I walked out with Thomas's hand steady on my shoulder, and I didn't look back. They chose pride over peace. So I chose justice. The 48 hours passed in silence. No calls, no emails, no response through Patricia. When the deadline expired at 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, Patricia sent me a single text. They've chosen trial. Filing Monday morning. They actually think they can win, Thomas said when I showed him the message. We were in my apartment, the city spread out below us through floor-to-ceiling windows. They think a judge will see this as a family dispute and tell you to respect your elders. Let them think that, I said. Reality will be more educational. Monday morning, Patricia filed our counterclaim at the courthouse. Within an hour, it was public record. Within 2 hours, every major news outlet in the state had a copy. By evening, it had gone national. The headlines wrote themselves. Daughter counterclaims against parents, $450,000 in alleged financial abuse. Viral leech case takes dark turn, evidence of decades of exploitation. Woman sues family over mother's death. Financial theft, emotional abuse. The charges were specific, detailed, impossible to dismiss as family drama. Financial exploitation of Rachel Curtis totaling over $250,000 across 15 years. Theft of $400,000 from my mother's estate. Fraud related to my grandmother's will and the house purchase. Intentional infliction of emotional distress spanning decades. Defamation through their false GoFundMe and media appearances. My phone started ringing before Patricia had even left the courthouse. Media requests interview, offers a producer from a major network wanting to do a documentary. I ignored them all except one, a representative from the National Coalition Against Family Financial Abuse, a nonprofit I'd never heard of. Ms. Curtis, we've been following your case since the recording went viral, the woman said. Her name was Dr. Jennifer Martinez, and she had the kind of voice that made you trust her immediately. What you're doing, taking a family abuse case to court with this level of documentation, it's unprecedented. We'd like to offer support. Legal research expert witnesses, whatever you need. Pro bono. Why? I asked. Because family financial abuse is one of the most underreported and underprosecuted crimes in America. Adult children are taught they owe their parents everything, that setting boundaries is selfish, that protecting themselves is betrayal. Your case could change that. It could set precedent that protects thousands of people. I hadn't intended to become a symbol. I just wanted justice for my mother and freedom for myself. But Dr. Martinez was right. This was bigger than me now. The first hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Patricia spent that time preparing me for what to expect, the formality of the courtroom, the process of presenting evidence, the importance of staying calm no matter what my family's attorney said. They'll try to make you the villain, she warned. They'll paint you as ungrateful, vindictive, cold. Don't react. Let the evidence speak. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, more institutional than dramatic. But it was packed. Media in the gallery, court reporters, representatives from women's rights organizations, and people I didn't know who'd simply come to watch.
My family sat at the defendant's table with Jeremy Chen, who'd apparently decided to continue representing them despite obvious misgivings. They looked worse than they had at our meeting. Robert's hands shook. My mother kept dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. David stared straight ahead like he was trying to disappear. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judith Weinberg, known for her no-nonsense approach and intolerance for manipulation. Patricia had been pleased when the case was assigned to her. Jeremy Chen presented his opening argument trying to frame this as a family misunderstanding blown out of proportion by social media. These are parents who made mistakes, yes, but who love their daughter and want reconciliation. This lawsuit is punishment for the crime of being imperfect. Then Patricia stood. She didn't gesture dramatically or raise her voice. She simply played the recording. My father's voice filled the courtroom. "She's nothing but a leech." My mother's laughter. "She's so desperate for our attention." David's mockery. "She actually thinks buying us things makes her family." And then the planning. The casual discussion of how to extract more money. The rotation of fake emergencies. The complete lack of guilt or remorse. I watched the courtroom. Watched observers lean forward, faces hardening. Watched jurors, this was a civil case, but a jury had been requested, visibly react. One woman covered her mouth. A man shook his head slowly. The most damaging line came at the end, "If only she weren't mine to begin with." Patricia paused the recording. That phrase, "weren't mine," becomes significant in light of the next piece of evidence. She displayed both birth certificates on the courtroom monitors. Rachel Curtis was not the biological child of Robert Curtis. Her biological father is Thomas Brennan, present in this courtroom today. Robert Curtis knew this from the day she was born. Yet he accepted Margaret Curtis's money, Rachel's grandmother, to raise her. Accepted thousands of dollars designated specifically for Rachel's welfare. Then spent 37 years emotionally abusing her for the crime of not being his biological child. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Weinberg had to gavel for silence. Patricia continued methodically. My mother's medical records read aloud by an expert witness who explained that the documented stress levels were consistent with someone in an actively abusive environment. The fake obituary that had broken my mother's spirit. The financial records showing systematic theft. By the time Patricia finished her presentation, the jury looked shell-shocked. Judge Weinberg's expression had gone from neutral to severe. Jeremy Chen tried to argue that these were private family matters that didn't belong in court. Judge Weinberg cut him off. "Counselor, financial exploitation is not a private matter. Emotional abuse is not a family affair. This court will examine every piece of evidence presented, and if it shows what Ms. Curtis's attorney claims, your clients will be held fully accountable. This is not a family dinner table. This is a court of law." The hearing lasted 6 hours. By the end, I was exhausted, but I'd maintained my composure. Let the evidence speak, Patricia had said, and it had spoken volumes. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded us. I made one brief statement. This case isn't just about me. It's about every adult child who's been told they're selfish for protecting themselves from abuse. It's about everyone who's been financially exploited by family members who use love as a weapon. And it's about my mother who died trying to escape but couldn't. I'm doing this for her. The clip played on every news channel that night. My phone filled with messages from strangers sharing their own stories. My parents did the same thing. "Thank you for fighting. You're changing everything." I hadn't wanted to be a symbol, but maybe that's what my mother's suffering and mine could become. Not just pain, but purpose. But the most damning testimony was yet to come. The trial resumed on a Wednesday morning, gray sky, threatening rain outside the courthouse windows. Patricia had been cryptic about the day's witness list, telling me only to trust the process. I sat at our table, Thomas beside me, watching as Jeremy Chen called his character witnesses, neighbors who barely knew our family, My father's golf buddies who testified he'd always seemed like a stand-up guy. Then Patricia stood for our rebuttal witnesses. The plaintiff calls David Curtis. The courtroom erupted in whispers. My head snapped toward the gallery entrance. David walked through the doors and I barely recognized him. He'd shaved, cut his hair, wore a suit that actually fit. But more than his appearance, something in his bearing had changed. The entitled slouch was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like resolve. He walked to the witness stand, was sworn in, and sat down. His eyes met mine for just a moment, and I saw in them something I'd never seen before: genuine remorse. Patricia approached the stand. "Mr. Curtis, what is your relationship to the plaintiff?" "I'm her brother, younger brother." His voice was steady but quiet. "And you're aware that you've been named as a defendant in this case, that your testimony here could be used against you?" "Yes, ma'am. My attorney advised me not to testify. I'm doing it anyway." "Why?" David took a breath. "Because my sister is telling the truth. And I've spent too many years helping our parents lie." The courtroom went completely silent. Patricia walked him through it methodically. When had he first realized I wasn't Robert's biological daughter? What had he done with that information? How had he used it? "I found documents when I was 28, David said. "I was looking for Mom's tax returns to forge her signature I needed to lie on a loan application, and I found a box hidden in her closet. Letters from Thomas Brennan, a birth certificate with his name on it. It was all there. What did you do with this information?" "I used it." His voice cracked slightly. "Whenever our parents got tired of supporting me, and they did more often than Rachel knows, whenever they started talking about cutting me off or making me get a real job, I'd say something. Not directly. Just little comments like, 'At least I'm really family,' or 'Blood matters, doesn't it?' I'd remind them about Rachel trying so hard to fit in, about how she was always chasing their approval. And what effect did this have? It worked every time. They'd get angry, but not at me. At her. All their resentment about Mom's past, about raising another man's kid, about the lie they'd been living, I'd redirect all of it toward Rachel. And suddenly my failures didn't seem so bad compared to the fundamental problem of Rachel existing." Patricia let that statement hang in the air for a moment. "Can you provide specific examples of how your parents treated Rachel differently?" David nodded, and what came next was the most damning testimony yet, because it came from someone who'd been there, who'd participated, who'd benefited from the abuse. "When Rachel graduated college, summa cum laude with a double major, Dad made jokes about grade inflation and bought diplomas. When she got her real estate license and started succeeding, Mom said she was lucky the market was good, and that she should focus on finding a husband instead of chasing money. When Rachel bought her first property at 24, paid for it herself. Every penny Dad asked why she didn't buy something big enough for the family to use." He paused, struggling to continue. Several jurors were taking notes rapidly. "Everything she accomplished was dismissed or diminished or turned into evidence that she was selfish for not including us. Meanwhile, I failed out of community college twice, couldn't keep a job, and they made excuses." David's finding himself. David just needs support. David's going through a tough time. "Why the difference in treatment?" Patricia asked, though we all knew the answer. Because Rachel represented Dad's humiliation. Every time he looked at her, he saw proof that his wife had loved someone else first, that he was second choice, that their marriage was based on family pressure instead of love. He couldn't forgive that, and he made her pay for it every single day. Patricia introduced my mother's medical records. "Mr. Curtis, were you aware that your mother's doctor had documented concerns about the family environment?" "Not until recently, but I should have seen it." David's composure was cracking now. "Mom was terrified all the time. Terrified of upsetting Dad. Terrified of losing Rachel. Terrified of everything. I remember when she reconnected with Thomas. I didn't know who he was, then just that Dad found out she'd been meeting someone. Dad didn't yell. He was calm. That's what made it scary." "What did your father say?"
He told Mom that if she ever contacted that man again, if she ever told Rachel the truth about her paternity, he'd make sure Rachel was cut off completely. Not just financially. He'd turn everyone against her, make sure she had nowhere to go. He said, "I'll destroy her so thoroughly she'll have no one left but us, and then I'll make sure she knows she's not even ours." The courtroom gasped. I felt Thomas's hand find mine under the table, squeezing tight. "And your mother's response?" Patricia asked gently. "She stayed silent. To protect Rachel. She endured everything, the isolation, the emotional abuse, the slow destruction of her spirit because she thought it was the only way to keep Rachel safe." David was openly crying now. "And it killed her. Maybe not directly, but the stress, the hopelessness, the trapped feeling, it killed her just as surely as if Dad had done it with his own hands." Patricia introduced more evidence through David's testimony, the fabricated emergencies they'd planned to extract money from me, the private group chat where they'd mocked me, the deliberate psychological manipulation that had spanned decades. Jeremy Chen tried to cross-examine, tried to suggest David was lying to save himself, but David's testimony was too detailed, too consistent with all the other evidence. And when Jeremy asked why they should believe him, David's answer was simple. "Because I'm under oath. Because I've already lost everything, my family, my reputation, any chance at Rachel's forgiveness. I have nothing to gain by being here except the knowledge that I finally told the truth." When David stepped down from the stand, he looked directly at Robert. "You broke Mom. You tried to break Rachel, but she was stronger than both of us, and now everyone knows what you are." Robert stared at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The judge called a recess. I walked out into the courthouse corridor, needing air, needing space. Thomas went to get water, leaving me alone for a moment. That's when David approached. He looked smaller, somehow, stripped of the arrogance that had always surrounded him like armor. "Rachel." I turned to face him, my expression neutral. "I know you'll never forgive me," he said. "I don't deserve forgiveness. I watched them destroy you, because it was easier than being a man, easier than standing up, easier than risking that they'd turn on me. I used you as a shield for my own inadequacy for 9 years. I waited, saying nothing. But I needed you to know you were always the strong one. You were always better than all of us. I was just too weak and too selfish to admit it." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Mom would be proud of you. For escaping. For fighting back. For being everything she wanted to be but couldn't." I looked at him for a long moment. "I don't forgive you, David. What you did was calculated and cruel, and it contributed to Mom's death just as much as his abuse did. You had the power to tell me the truth, to defend me, to do anything other than what you did. And you chose yourself every single time." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "But," I continued, "I acknowledge that you finally did one right thing. You told the truth when it mattered. You're still a coward, but at least you're an honest one now. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was honest, and maybe that was all either of us could manage." David nodded again, turned, and walked away. I watched him go, and I felt no regret. Some bridges burn, and that's okay. Not everything needs to be saved. When I returned to the courtroom, Patricia leaned over. "That was the strongest testimony I've ever seen. The jury was riveted." "How long until they decide?" I asked. She checked her watch. "After closing arguments, in a case this clear?" "Not long." She was right. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. The jury filed back into the courtroom 47 minutes after they'd left. I'd been watching the clock, each minute stretching like hours, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles had gone white. Thomas sat beside me, his presence steady and solid. Patricia was reviewing notes, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. 47 minutes. For a case this complex with this much evidence, it was remarkably fast. "All rise," the bailiff called. Judge Weinberg took her seat, her expression unreadable. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman stood.
He was a man in his 60s, a retired accountant according to the jury selection notes, wearing glasses and a cardigan that made him look like someone's grandfather. His voice was clear and steady. "We have your honor. On the charge of financial exploitation of Rachel Curtis, how do you find? We find in favor of the plaintiff." The words hit me like a physical force. My breath caught. On the charge of theft from the estate of Sarah Curtis, in favor of the plaintiff. On the charge of fraud regarding property and inheritance, in favor of the plaintiff. On the charge of intentional infliction of emotional distress, in favor of the plaintiff. On the charge of defamation, in favor of the plaintiff. 5 times, 5 counts, 5 unanimous decisions that I was right, that they were wrong, that everything I'd endured was real and documented and undeniable. The foreman continued reading the damages. The jury awards Rachel Curtis $350,000, $200,000 for stolen funds from her mother's estate, $100,000 for financial exploitation over 15 years, and $50,000 for emotional distress and punitive damages. The courtroom erupted in applause. I heard it as if from a distance, muffled and strange. Judge Weinberg's gavel came down hard, calling for order, but the applause continued for several more seconds. I sat perfectly still. I couldn't move, couldn't react. Patricia's hand found my shoulder, squeezing. Thomas's fingers wrapped around mine. But I felt frozen, locked in a moment I'd been building toward for months, but never quite believed would arrive. I'd won. Not just won, I'd been validated, officially, by a jury of strangers who'd looked at the evidence and said you were right. They were wrong. The abuse was real. The exploitation was real. You weren't ungrateful or oversensitive or cruel. You were protecting yourself from people who'd spent decades hurting you. Judge Weinberg spoke again, and the courtroom quieted to hear her. In addition to the financial judgment, this court issues a permanent restraining order. Robert Curtis. Jennifer Curtis and David Curtis are prohibited from contacting Rachel Curtis by any means, phone, email, text, social media, or through third parties. They may not come within 500 feet of her residence or workplace. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and potential jail time. She paused, looking directly at my family. They sat at their table like statues. Robert's head bowed, my mother crying silently. David staring at his hands. "I want to make something clear for the record," Judge Weinberg continued. "This case represents more than a family dispute. It represents a pattern of systematic abuse that this court will not tolerate. Financial exploitation of family members is a crime, not a right. Emotional abuse that spans decades and results in documented medical harm is not family business. It is actionable harm that courts have a duty to address." She adjusted her glasses, her voice carrying the weight of legal precedent being created in real time. "This case will serve as precedent for adult children seeking protection from familial financial abuse. The court recognizes that family relationships do not grant unlimited license to exploit, manipulate, or abuse. Adult children have legal rights to set boundaries and protect themselves regardless of biological connections or social expectations about family obligation." Patricia had gone very still beside me. I knew what this meant even before she whispered, "She just changed the law." Judge Weinberg continued. "Too often adult children are told they owe their parents everything, that protecting themselves is selfish, that setting boundaries is betrayal. This court rejects that premise. Family is not a license for abuse. And when abuse occurs, victims have every right to severe contact, seek damages, and rebuild their lives without their abusers." She looked directly at me then. "Ms. Curtis, you showed remarkable courage in bringing this case forward. Your documentation, your persistence, and your willingness to face public scrutiny may help countless others find the strength to do the same. This court hopes you find peace and healing in your future. All rise." The bailiff called again as Judge Weinberg stood and left the courtroom. The moment she was gone, the room exploded into activity.
Reporters rushing for the doors, representatives from women's organizations approaching Patricia strangers in the gallery, trying to reach me to shake my hand or share their own stories. Thomas pulled me into a hug, and I finally felt something break loose in my chest. Not tears I'd cried enough. Something else. A knot that had lived there for 37 years, tight and painful and constant, suddenly loosening. Not disappearing, but releasing its stranglehold. "Your mother would be so proud," Thomas whispered into my hair. "She'd be so damn proud." We had to navigate through the crowd to leave. Patricia handled the press of people with professional efficiency, promising statements, later redirecting questions, clearing a path to the exit. But we couldn't avoid the media outside. They were everywhere. Cameras, microphones, reporters shouting questions. Patricia had warned me this would happen, had prepared a statement for me to read. But when I stepped up to the microphone stand, someone had set up on the courthouse steps. The prepared words felt wrong. I spoke from the heart instead. "This verdict isn't just about me," I said, and my voice carried clearly in the afternoon air. "It's for every daughter who was told she wasn't enough, for every son who was treated as a resource instead of a person, for everyone who was made to feel guilty for protecting themselves from harm." I could see people in the crowd nodding, some crying. A woman in the front held up a sign that read, "Justice for Adult Children." "Family is supposed to be safe," I continued. "It's supposed to be where we're loved and supported and valued. But sometimes family is where we're hurt the most. And when that happens, you have the right to leave. You have the right to protect yourself. You have the right to set boundaries and severe contact and build a life where you're safe." The cameras were all focused on me, recording every word. I knew this would be played on news programs, shared on social media, possibly seen by millions. I wasn't speaking just to the reporters anymore. I was speaking to everyone who'd ever felt trapped by the word family. "You have the right to seek justice," I said. "You're not selfish. You're not cruel. You're not ungrateful. You're protecting yourself. And that's not just okay, it's necessary. No one should have to set themselves on fire to keep others warm, even if those others are family." I paused, gathering my thoughts for the final statement. This case was about my family's abuse. But the verdict is about so much more. It's about changing how we think about family obligation. It's about establishing that love should never require harm to oneself. And it's about my mother, Sarah Curtis, who died before she could escape. "Mom, I did what you couldn't. I got free. And I made sure they couldn't do to anyone else what they did to us. This is for you." The clip played on every major news network that night. By morning, it had been viewed 15 million times online. Rachel Curtis' courthouse statement became one of the most shared videos of the year. Legal scholars wrote think pieces about the precedent. Therapists discussed it in sessions with clients escaping toxic families. It became a rallying cry for a movement I'd never intended to start. But as I sat in my apartment that evening, Thomas beside me, watching the sunset paint Portland in shades of gold and pink, I realized something important. The verdict was closure. The money was compensation. The restraining order was protection. But my revenge wasn't finished. The weeks after the verdict were strange. I'd expected to feel triumphant, vindicated, free. And I did feel those things, but they were quieter than I'd imagined. Victory wasn't a firework explosion. It was more like dawn breaking after a long night, steady, gradual, inevitable. I monitored my family from a distance, not out of obsession, but simple awareness. Patricia kept me informed of the practical consequences flowing from the judgment. They'd been forced to sell their rental apartment to cover legal fees. The $350,000 award plus court costs had devastated what little savings they had left. Robert had taken a part-time job at a hardware store. My mother worked as a receptionist at a dental office. David, who'd never held a job for more than 6 months in his adult life, was now working night shifts at a warehouse, loading trucks and organizing inventory. They'd moved into a subsidized senior housing complex on the east side of the city, the kind of place with thin walls and shared laundry facilities where people lived because they had to, not because they wanted to. The social humiliation was complete. Former friends crossed the street to avoid them. The country club where my father had played golf revoked his membership. My mother's book club quietly asked her to leave. I didn't cause any of this. I didn't need to. Natural consequences were doing the work that revenge used to require. They'd built their lives on a foundation of exploitation and lies, and when that foundation crumbled, everything above it collapsed too. I felt no satisfaction watching it happen. No glee. Just a quiet sense that the universe was finally balanced. But then Patricia called with unexpected news. "They're facing eviction," she said. "They're 3 months behind on rent. The housing authority is starting proceedings." I sat in my office at second chapter women client files spread across my desk and felt something unexpected. Not pity exactly, but a kind of tired recognition. They would never change. They would always be people who took more than they gave, who blamed others for consequences they created. And that meant they would always struggle. "I see," I said. "I wanted you to know in case they try to contact you through indirect channels," Patricia continued. "The restraining order is still in effect, but desperate people get creative." After we hung up, I sat for a long time looking out my office window. The firm had grown beyond what I'd imagined. We now had 3 counselors, 2 legal advisors, and partnerships with job training programs across the state. We'd helped 47 women in 6 months. 47 women who'd escaped situations like my mother's, like mine. But we were running out of space. The idea came to me slowly, then crystallized with sudden clarity. I pulled up real estate listings filtered for properties in my area and started scrolling. 20 minutes later, I found it. A Victorian house 3 blocks from my apartment. Built in 1892, neglected for years, but the bones were good. High ceilings, original woodwork, a wraparound porch. The photos showed peeling paint and overgrown gardens, but I could see past that to what it could become. The listing price was $680,000. I called the listing agent before I could second-guess myself. The house was mine within 2 weeks. I used money from the settlement and my grandmother's trust, the inheritance that had been meant to give me freedom. Now it would provide freedom for others. Thomas helped me interview contractors. We walked through the empty rooms together, planning renovations. The first floor would be counseling offices and meeting spaces. The second floor would be converted into 6 residential rooms for women needing temporary housing while they rebuilt their lives. The third floor, the old servants' quarters, would become my personal workspace and a library. "Your mother would love this," Thomas said as we stood in what would become the main gathering room. Afternoon light poured through tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. She always wanted to create something that mattered, something that helped people. I thought about my mother, about the woman I'd barely known, but was slowly discovering through Thomas's stories and the letters she'd left behind. A woman who'd wanted to open a bookstore, who'd loved poetry, who'd dreamed of helping other women escape the trap she'd fallen into. "The center will be named after her," I said. "A plaque outside the Sarah Curtis Center for Second Chapter Women in memory of a woman who deserved her second chapter." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. He pulled me into a hug, and we stood there in the empty room that would soon be full of women finding their way to new lives. The renovations took 4 months. I was there almost every day making decisions about paint colors and furniture placement, ensuring every detail supported our mission. The house transformed from abandoned relic to warm sanctuary. Soft colors, comfortable furniture spaces designed to feel safe rather than institutional. The week before the grand opening, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Patricia. "I want you to contact my family's attorney. I have a proposal." "Rachel, the restraining order." "I'm not asking to meet with them. I want to make an offer through proper legal channels." I explained my idea. Patricia was silent for a long moment. "Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure." The message went through Jeremy Chen to my family. The Sarah Curtis Center for Second Chapter Women was opening and would need volunteers. Kitchen help, gardening, administrative work.
If they were interested in volunteering not for pay, not for public recognition, but simply to contribute something positive to a world they'd harmed, they were welcome to apply through the standard volunteer process. It wasn't a legal requirement. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness. It was simply an offer, a chance to do something constructive with the consequences they were living in. The letter was careful to explain that this didn't mean contact with me. They would work with the staff, not with me directly. The restraining order remained in effect. If they chose to participate, it would be because they wanted to help other women escape what my mother couldn't, not because they thought it would repair our relationship. "Why?" Thomas asked when I told him. "Why give them anything?" I thought about how to explain it. Because my revenge was never supposed to be about making them suffer forever. It was about making them face consequences and getting free myself. I'm free now. The suffering they're experiencing is their own doing, not mine. And if they want to do something productive with their lives, something that actually helps people instead of hurting them, I'm not going to stand in the way. And if they refuse, then they refuse. Either way, I'm fine. The center exists. My mother's name is honored. Women are being helped. What they choose to do with this offer says something about them, not about me. The response came a week later through Jeremy Chen. Robert had refused, immediately called it insulting. My mother had also declined, saying it was too painful. But David had written a letter not to me, but to the center's volunteer coordinator. He wrote that he understood this wasn't forgiveness, wasn't a path back to family. He wrote that he wanted to do something useful for the first time in his life. He was applying to volunteer in the kitchen and garden work that didn't require interaction with residents' work, where he could contribute without causing harm. The volunteer coordinator interviewed him, checked his references, and ultimately accepted him for a trial period. I approved the decision, but made it clear I wouldn't be involved in supervising his work. If he wanted to do something good, he could do it without needing my validation. The Sarah Curtis Center opened on a sunny Saturday in June. 40 people attended the ribbon cutting. Thomas spoke about my mother's dreams. Dr. Jennifer Martinez from the National Coalition Against Family Financial Abuse gave a keynote about how the Curtis case was changing legislation in 12 states. 3 women who'd gone through our program shared their stories. I stood at the podium last, looking out at the crowd gathered on the Victorians' newly restored porch, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. "This building represents transformation," I said. "Not just of wood and paint, but of pain into purpose. Every woman who walks through these doors will find what my mother never had: support resources, and the knowledge that leaving abuse isn't selfish, it's survival." Later, as guests toured the house and I stood in the garden, Thomas appeared at my side. "Some people are calling what you did forgiveness," he said, "offering them the volunteer opportunity." I shook my head. It's not forgiveness. Forgiveness would mean releasing them from debt, emotional or otherwise. I haven't done that. The restraining order stands. The judgment stands. The truth about what they did stands. Then what is it? I watched a butterfly land on one of the newly planted roses, watched it rest there in the sunshine, and found the words. It's freedom. I'm free enough that their suffering doesn't define me anymore. Free enough that I can build something beautiful without needing them to suffer for it. Free enough to offer an opportunity without caring if they take it. That's not forgiveness. I turned to look at Thomas, at this man who was my real father, who'd spent decades searching for me, who'd stood beside me through everything. Some called it forgiveness. I called it freedom. 6 months after the center's opening, I stood in what we now called the Sarah Curtis Memorial Garden, watching early morning mist rise from the newly planted roses. The Victorian house behind me hummed with quiet activity. Women making breakfast in the communal kitchen, a counseling session starting in the front parlor, someone practicing job interview answers in the library upstairs. 32 women had completed our program in these 6 months. 4 were currently in residence, rebuilding their lives one day at a time. I knew their stories the way I knew my own daughters escaping financially abusive parents,
Mothers fleeing adult children who'd turned exploitation into an art form. Sisters extracting themselves from families that saw them as resources rather than people. Every woman who walked through our doors reminded me of my mother, of myself, of everyone who'd ever been told that love meant accepting harm. Thomas found me in the garden carrying 2 cups of coffee. At 63, he moved with the careful grace of someone who'd spent decades searching and had finally found what he was looking for. He'd become a fixture at the center, volunteering in ways that didn't require official titles, fixing broken fixtures, tending the garden, offering quiet support to women who needed to know that good men existed. "Big day," he said, handing me a cup. "The mayor's office just confirmed they're coming to the 1-year anniversary celebration." "That's 6 months away," I pointed out. "Which means you have 6 months to write a speech that doesn't make me cry." He smiled. "Your mother would be so proud of you, not just for surviving, but for turning suffering into service, for building something that matters." I looked back at the house at the plaque beside the front door that read, "The Sarah Curtis Center for Second Chapter Women in Memory of a Woman Who Deserved Her Second Chapter." My mother never got to write hers, but she'd made sure I could write mine. And in writing mine, I was helping others write theirs. "Have you heard from them?" Thomas asked carefully. He rarely mentioned my family directly respecting the boundary I'd established. "Nothing direct. Patricia mentioned they moved to Arizona about 3 months ago. Apparently the publicity here was too much." I sipped my coffee. "They're surviving. Struggling, but surviving." What I didn't tell Thomas, what I barely admitted to myself, was that I occasionally checked public records, not out of longing, but simply to know. Robert was working full-time at a hardware store now. My mother had found work at a non-profit, ironically helping seniors with financial planning. They lived in a modest apartment, drove old cars, lived the kind of life they'd once looked down on. David had sent a card on my birthday last month. No return address, postmarked from Tucson. Inside, just one line in his handwriting, "Thank you for showing me what strength actually looks like. I'm trying to be better." I'd kept the card but hadn't responded. Some relationships aren't meant to be repaired, and that was okay. David was trying to be better, that was his journey. Mine was here in this garden, in this house full of women finding their way to freedom. My real family was here too. Thomas, who'd never stopped looking for me. Patricia, who'd fought for me with the ferocity of a true ally. The staff at Second Chapter Women who showed up every day to do work that mattered. The women we helped who taught me that healing isn't linear, but it is possible. Family, I'd learned, isn't about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, who loves without conditions or expectations of return. I'd spent 37 years trying to earn family. Now I simply lived in it. That evening, after the last staff member had gone home and the residents were settled in their rooms, I stood in my apartment and caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. I stopped, really looked at the woman staring back. She was different from the person who'd answered that accidental phone call a year ago. That Rachel had been successful, but hollow, accomplished, but desperate, generous, but empty. This Rachel had boundaries, had peace, had purpose beyond proving her worth to people who'd never valued it. No more desperate seeking of approval from people incapable of giving it. No more twisting myself into impossible shapes trying to earn love that was never available. No more believing that if I just gave enough, did enough was enough, they'd finally see me. I saw myself now, and I liked what I saw. I was never the leech, I whispered to my reflection. I was the legacy Mom fought to protect, and now I'm free. Outside my window, Portland rain began to fall, that gentle, persistent rain that makes everything green and growing. The city lights blurred into watercolor through the drops on the glass. Somewhere in this city, women were making plans to leave toxic situations. Somewhere, daughters were learning they didn't owe their parents everything. Somewhere, people were choosing themselves. And here in this apartment, in this life I'd built from the ashes of the old one, I was finally completely free. This was the real revenge, not their suffering, but my thriving. Not their destruction, but my reconstruction. Living well, loving myself, helping others do the same, creating meaning from pain and sanctuary from suffering. My story could have ended in bitterness, in endless litigation and eternal anger, in a prison of resentment that would have been just as confining as the family I'd escaped. But it didn't. Some stories end with revenge. Mine ended with rebirth. And that's Rachel's story. A story that started with a phone call that shattered everything and ended with a woman who built something beautiful from the pieces. Rachel Curtis did what so many of us dream about but feel too scared to attempt. She set boundaries. She chose herself. She walked away from people who hurt her even when those people were family. And she didn't just survive that choice, she thrived because of it. If you're watching this and Rachel's story resonates with you, you're not alone. So many of us have experienced versions of what Rachel endured. Maybe it wasn't financial exploitation but emotional manipulation. Maybe it wasn't parents but siblings or adult children or partners who used the word family as a weapon to keep us trapped. Maybe you've spent years giving and giving and giving, hoping that one day somehow it would be enough to earn the love you deserved. Here's what Rachel's story teaches us. You were always enough. The problem was never you. And choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who didn't respect you? Have you walked away from toxic relationships? Or are you thinking about it? What would you do in Rachel's situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters, and this community is here to support you. If Rachel's journey moved you, if it made you think, if it gave you even a small spark of courage to make changes in your own life, please hit that like button. It helps this story reach other people who need to hear it. People who might be sitting in their own version of Rachel's apartment, wondering if they're crazy for feeling hurt by the people who are supposed to love them. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about women who chose themselves, who set boundaries, who transformed pain into purpose, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. We share stories every week about resilience, courage, and the complicated truth about family relationships. Stories that remind us we're not alone. Stories that give us permission to protect ourselves. Stories that prove it's never too late to choose freedom. Rachel didn't just escape her toxic family. She built a legacy that honors her mother and helps other women do the same. She turned her worst experience into her greatest purpose. And in doing so, she showed us all what's possible when we stop trying to earn love from people who will never give it and start building lives that reflect our own worth. Remember, family should be safe. When it's not, you have the right to leave. You have the right to protect yourself. You have the right to choose peace over blood relation. Some stories end with revenge. Rachel's ended with rebirth. What will yours end with? Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, you are enough exactly as you are. You always have been.